name is Honey. I'm almost 30 and I use Instagram to share pictures of my art. Okay, I know what you're thinking. Honey is a weird name, so please don't tell me what I already know. No, it's not a nickname. My parents are from California and they're like uber hippies, so go figure. As you can probably guess, I grew up in this overly loving, peacenik environment, which I'm sure sounds cool at first, but let's just say it left me wholly unprepared to deal with some of the darker things in life. Needless to say, I really struggled with my mental health in my mid to late 20s. I don't want to totally blame my parents for that. I think they did the best that they could, but they seriously didn't help with their just fill your heart with love nonsense, when what I needed was actual therapy and antidepressants. I got access to professional help in the end, but what really helped me keep it together in the meantime was my art. Before I started to suffer with depression and stuff, I used to paint and draw some pretty basic stuff. Landscapes, portraits, floral displays, stuff like that. But when I started to really suffer, I let out all my stress, anxiety, and sadness onto paper, and as weird as it sounds, that's when my art really started to flourish. It was probably the only silver lining to ever come out of my poor mental health. The more I posted my newer, darker art on Instagram, the more attention it got. My follower count shot up, I got offers for commissions, I actually managed to hook up with a t-shirt merch company and make a few sales that way too. Like I drew this pizza demon thing one time and that made me a few $100 from people wanting that thing on a t-shirt too. So when I say dark, I really do mean I started drawing some really messed up stuff. The pizza demon thing was probably the lightest-hearted thing I put out there in that time, and even then, people said it was super messed up. So as you might imagine, my new followers included some pretty messed up people. I don't say that to be like I'm complaining or mean or anything. I say that because one of them in particular made my life pretty difficult. So I get a direct message off of this guy who says he really loved my work and wanted a piece commissioned. Of course I say yes. So he follows up by asking what my rates are. I had no idea what I was doing in terms of dollar amounts at that time, so when I quoted him like $80 for a picture, he started explaining that I needed to value my art more, how my work was just as valuable as any other, and how I should be charging a whole bunch more for my art. I had no idea what to up my amount to, so I kind of threw out a few ballpark figures before the guy makes my jaw hit the floor when he offers me a straight $1,000 for an A3 size picture of whatever I wanted to draw or paint. I couldn't believe it. $1,000 for a picture? Which was more money than I'd ever made in my whole life. I got to work straight away, and within a week I'd poured my heart and soul out onto paper and sent it off, and got my money via PayPal. Having that kind of affirmation actually lifted my mood to the highest it had been in months. I felt valued, like I could contribute something to the world. I was still dealing with my demons, but when I learned that I could actually profit from them, that I could make use of something that plagued me, it was a great feeling. I stayed in touch with the guy. I'd never been so grateful to anyone in my life until that point, and I'd be lying if I said I didn't think I'd be able to get more money out of him if he wanted something else commissioning. We used to talk back and forth a fair bit, and he shared that he too was an artist. I asked him what kind of artist he was, and he told me that he worked in some very unusual mediums. Naturally, this only got me all the more curious, as I got super dark with my art too, but he seemed pretty timid to talk about it. I get that people can be shy about showing off their artwork. I was pretty shy too at one point, but this guy needed some serious coaxing in order to show me anything. When he finally agreed to show me anything, he told me that he'd do it via one of those self-destructing messages that InstaNow does. I didn't question anything. Like I knew he'd send one of those self-destructing pictures, maybe so he could protect his intellectual property or something. I was a little confused as to why he didn't seem to trust me, but hey, I pretty much adored this guy, so like I said, I didn't ask too many questions. I waited patiently for him to send me a picture of some of his work. It took a minute or two, but he sends me this 3-second self-destructing picture that I was honestly super excited to see by that point. But when I actually saw what it was, even if it was for a real brief time, I really wish I hadn't. It looked like a goat's head in a jar of some kind, and the fluid it was floating in looked sort of greenish-black, and I'm pretty sure it was formaldehyde. But it wasn't just that. The guy had opted to make a few little additions to the goat head, additions that I couldn't all catch because of how quick the picture flashed before my eyes, but the ones that I saw were horrible. It looked like he'd carved the lips away so that all the creature's teeth were showing, and on each one was carved or written a little symbol. I'm also pretty sure he either chemically changed the creature's eyes or replaced them entirely with a kind of metal or semi-precious stone. They had this weird glint to them. Like I said, there wasn't enough time for me to drink the whole thing in, but there was plenty more about the creature's head that had been messed with. It wasn't the details which really got to me. It was the idea that the corpse of an animal had been so horribly disrespected just so he could try to make some kind of art out of it. I had questions, a lot of questions, but the first thing I had to ask him was if it was really real or just some kind of mock-up of a skull. He told me it was real, very real, and that he'd gotten hold of a goat's head from a butcher, preserved it, and then basically surgically edited the thing over time, mostly using dental tools, apparently for the sake of precision. I personally thought the whole thing was a disgrace. I'm vegan, and I try to stay as ethical as possible, but at the same time, I didn't want to go imposing my own worldview on the guy, especially since I liked him so much. I also didn't want to offend him, so I told him his work was interesting and jaw-dropping. Then asked if he worked with ink and paper or any variation on that. He told me no, and that he only worked with skulls, how they were the capsule that held all the hopes and dreams and fears and needs of the once living creature they belonged to, and that working with them was kind of sacred. I didn't really know what to say to that. He was right in a way. He sounded absolutely crazy for saying it out loud, but I couldn't entirely refute his point. It was like talking to some kind of insane genius almost. Not long after, he asked me if he thought he was cruel to work in such a medium. I told him people might find his work provocative, maybe even objectionable, but that it was fascinating nevertheless. Then he asked if I wanted to see more. Unlike the first time, there was no doubt in me that I most definitely did not want to see any more of this guy's work, but like I said before, I also really didn't want to offend him. So what could I do? It took me much longer to reply to his message that time, but in the end I told him sure, and he replied saying that he'd use another self-destructing message. Again, I waited a minute or two for the message to come through, and when it did, I opened up the message thread and tapped the little reveal message thing with some reluctance. The first time around, for that goat heads thing, I at least had some degree of curiosity, but at that time, I was just plain horrified by what I saw. It was a monkey's head, or at least it looked like it was some kind of primate. And if I thought the goat's head had received some disturbing additions, this latest one turned out to be 1,000 times worse. It was so bad I only caught the briefest glimpse of it and just had to look away and lock my phone screen to get it away from me. I was a little more confrontational with him after that, telling him that one was considerably more disturbing than the first, and I thought it was maybe a little too sensitive to see any more of his work. He asked why, and I broke it to him that I've been vegan for a few years, that I was a real animal lover, and although I could stomach the goat thing's head, I really couldn't handle the monkey head as it looked far too human to me. That's when he replies to me all like, it's interesting you should say that, and goes on to explain that it's his dream to work with a human skull, how he's put up a few ads on 4chan and stuff asking if anyone would be willing to donate their head should they die, but hadn't gotten any replies. And then he told me that he was getting really impatient, and that he was worried he wouldn't get a chance to realize his dream. The whole exchange had reached peak creepiness by that point, as you can imagine, and it was fast getting to the point when I was reaching for that block option, as I just didn't feel safe talking to him anymore. So by the time he actually messaged me another self-destructing message asking if I'd be willing to help him get hold of a human head, I just noped out of there and stopped replying to him. Like, I'm not sure he was actually asking me to, kill anyone with him or for him, but just the idea of going about procuring an actual human head? God, no. But I couldn't bring myself to block him. Like, he was a potential source of sales after all, and I could make a lot of money from the guy if I kept him interested in my work. I try not to think about it, but I get these really bad feelings from time to time. Like, what if he catches on to the fact that I just ignore him? And what if he decides that my head is the one he'd like to use to complete his magnum opus? I try very careful with what I post now, making sure it's only ever pictures of my art, and that the handful of landscape photos I'd posted on my profile had been deleted, just so whoever it is can't get an idea of where I live. Because if they do work out where I'm at, there's just no way I'd be able to go around feeling safe, not with someone whose ambition is to work with severed human heads, knowing where I lay mine at night. Alexis Sharkey was born in Houston, Texas in the year 1994 to her father, Mike Robinault, and her mother, Stacy. After graduating high school, Alexis initially studied biology education at a university in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, but after gaining her diploma, she seemed to be in no rush to get a teaching job and found work at a premium hair and skincare company named Monat. She was still working for Monat when she began to gain a great number of followers on the photography-based social media app, Instagram. A combination of her natural beauty and her champagne lifestyle had users hooked. She and her husband, a wealthy West Texas consultant who was 26 years her senior, were accustomed to vacationing a lot, and Alexis wasted no opportunity to document her travels, sharing pictures with her followers on a daily basis. Not to mention sharing images of the couple's extravagant life around Houston, the place that they'd made their home. Her posts would be seen, liked, and shared by tens of thousands of people, and by December of 2020, Alexis had over 69,000 followers. Now, as you may know, Instagram users with large amounts of followers are often contacted by private companies and offered large amounts of money in exchange for advertising their products, and Alexis was no different. Within a relatively short period of time, whilst still working full-time selling products for Monat, which has since been accused of being nothing more than a multi-level marketing company, Alexis was getting sponsorship deals which made her income swell to even higher levels than her consultant husband. But all was not well in the Sharkey home. A close friend of Alexis confessed that she had recently confided in her that she was filing for a divorce. Some had always doubted their relationship given that Tom was considerably older than her, and aside from an intense attraction, the couple seemed to have very little in common. Yet for some reason, Alexis didn't move out of the apartment they shared, even though she and Tom were apparently separated. However, she did see an opportunity to get a breakaway from Tom, as Thanksgiving weekend gave her the chance to stay over at a friend's place for the celebrations. She told her soon-to-be ex-husband that she would be back by the weekend, but on the Saturday following Thanksgiving, Alexis's mother, Stacy, received a call from Tom saying that Alexis was missing, and that he hadn't heard from her since Friday. A few days later, on November 28th, Alexis's mother posted to the social media site Facebook, stating that her daughter hadn't been heard from in over 24 hours, adding that police were involved and that Alexis had last been seen in the Houston area. This was especially concerning for Stacy, as she hadn't seen her daughter since the previous Christmas due to travel restrictions caused by the pandemic. Alexis had planned to return home to her parents back in Pennsylvania for Thanksgiving, but as the number of cases continued to rise all over the United States, the family decided it was much safer for Alexis to stay in Texas. But that very same morning that Stacy posted her plea on Facebook, a sanitation worker employed by the city of Houston saw something unusual lying on the side of the road. At first, he simply believed it was some kind of mannequin, due to the lack of clothes and the stiff positioning of the thing's limbs. But the worker's supervisor, a man named John Richardson, later said that the employee had sounded terrified when he called him, saying he'd noticed the apparent mannequin looked a little too real upon closer inspection, and that he suspected the situation to be far worse. John drove down to where the supposed mannequin was lying at the side of the road, then rushed to call 911 when he saw that it was no mannequin at all. That it was in fact a lifeless human body. The moment of realization traumatized him, and he later told a local radio station that the sight of the body had been playing in his head every day since he discovered it. 2 days later, on November 30th, Houston Police Department held a press conference in which they announced that they had identified the body as belonging to none other than Alexis Sharkey. Her soon-to-be ex-husband got a call from a local coroner's office, asking him to drive over to identify the body of a potential loved one. He knew immediately that it was going to be Alexis, but somehow found the strength to head on over, where he found her lying on a mortician's table, dead but with no obvious signs of injury. Yet to his horror, after the news of Alexis's death began to circulate in the news, he began to hear rumors that it was his maltreatment of her that had been the cause of her death. Anonymous accounts from people claiming to be friends of Alexis had told a number of online news publications that the separation from her husband had caused a huge amount of tension in their home, a tension that had soured into hatred. These anonymous friends claimed that Alexis herself had told them that some intense arguments had descended into violence more than once, and that her husband had been putting his hands on her. Suddenly, Tom Sharkey found himself bathed in the media spotlight, and for entirely negative reasons. In what became a lightning-quick trial by media, one which was fueled by social media speculation, tens of thousands of furious people assumed that it was Tom that was the murderer, and he began to receive a slew of death threats. It certainly didn't help that initially Tom had refused to comment on his wife's death, but as the threats against him became more and more tangible, he reached out to give a statement to a local ABC affiliate. "She understood me. I understood her. We didn't fight when she left. I just told her she shouldn't drive under the influence," he said, overtly implying that Alexis had been drunk the night that she left her friend's Thanksgiving celebrations. He also seemed to insist that there was no trouble in their marriage, and that they weren't filing for divorce at all. This was something that was backed up by Alexis's mother, who said her daughter would have told her if she was suffering marital problems. When the Harris County Institute of Forensic Sciences conducted an autopsy on Alexis's body, they told reporters that they couldn't rule out the possibility of foul play. This only cemented her mother's suspicions that she met a violent end. "I believe solely that she was murdered because of the manner in which her body was left," Stacy said. "It just drives deep into the soul that something very malicious happened here, and I want to get to the bottom of it." Friends said she confided in them on a recent trip to Mexico that she feared for her life, although she apparently did not say why she held such suspicions. But if this was the case, just who exactly killed Alexis? Police seem to have pretty much ruled out the idea that she was murdered by her husband, since he was quick to volunteer his cooperation with them in the aftermath of her death, and has since stated that they believe it to be only a matter of time before arrests are made. So perhaps Alexis's murder was related to her career selling beauty products of Monat. Not only has Monat been accused of utilizing the techniques of outlawed, multi-level marketing companies, but the quality of its products has also come into question. In the year before Alexis's death, Monat was allegedly investigated by Florida's Attorney General after hundreds of claims that its products caused a host of hair and skin issues. The company was permanently barred from using false or misleading statements in its marketing and sales of its beauty products, and faced $1 million fine on top of class action lawsuits from those that, after using the products, claim they experience hair loss, balding, and itching. Alexis was a prolific seller of Monat's products, once receiving a check for $10,000 as the winner of a company sales competition. That would certainly make for a lot of women who might blame her for essentially disfiguring them. There's also a decent chance that since Monat's MLM tactics would leave a lot of people out of pocket, that somewhere down the line Alexis had screwed one of her underlings out of a great deal of cash, perhaps just before the news of Monat's subpar products broke in the media, perhaps leaving a person totally unable to shift a hefty amount of stock they'd purchased. This would doubtless leave a person angry, vengeful, maybe even murderous. And besides, hell hath no fury like a woman scorned. If this is indeed the case, and Alexis's death is intrinsically linked to her Monat sales, then it seems that her status as an Instagram influencer actually led to her murder. The influence she exerted over those that followed her no doubt led to increased sales, thus increasing the potential pool of victims for Monat's frankly dangerous products. It's very possible that without Instagram, she may not have made the sale to that one person unhinged enough to seek revenge when their skin began to blister, or their hair began to fall out, or their scalp began to itch unbearably. It seems we'll soon find out who's responsible for Alexis's death. But if it is related to social media, it would be very ironic that a medium that has brought opportunity and new beginnings to so many brought one young woman to her end. A few years ago, I started getting into this Italian crime show called Gomorrah. I must have watched every series of The Sopranos like a zillion times, and a friend of mine recommended Gomorrah to me, selling it to me as being like the Italian Sopranos, only 100 times more brutal and bleak. And needless to say, I was hooked, and I binge-watched the first 2 series in like a week, usually with my phone nearby so I could text my buddy like, "Oh God, this show's so amazing," every so often, and thanking him to turning me on to it. Then not long after, I'm scrolling through Instagram and I notice I'm getting Italian language sponsored ads. I figured it was just a glitch in the app's algorithm, something like that, and didn't think anything of it. But it kept happening, over and over again. I get all kinds of ads for different products and services that were only available in Italy. I'm a little embarrassed that it took me as long as it did to make the connection between the Italian advertisements and the fact that I've been watching Gomorrah. But when I finally did, it seriously gave me the creeps. My phone was listening to me. My phone had been broadcasting the sound of the TV series to somewhere that was then tailoring the promoted posts in my Insta feed to stuff it was assumed that I might buy. But then if it was listening to me and sending whatever I was saying off to some advertising company or whatever, there's legit nothing to say that the government can't access with that same technology. For years we worried about the possibility of George Orwell's 1984 becoming a reality, fretting over a totalitarian government that would put cameras or microphones in our homes that they could then use to listen to us. But do you think Orwell could have predicted that we'd do it all voluntarily? That all you had to do was package the telescreen in a tiny, shiny package, couple it with social media, and we'd basically hand over our collective privacy on a silver platter. Like, I might sound legit crazy 20 or 30 years ago if I was all like, they're listening to us, they're spying on us on our phones. But today, it's a matter of record that our devices record ambient noises before analyzing it and passing on keywords to advertisers. And it's not even the fact that it's happening that's the scary part. It's the fact that no one really cares. No one really gives a hoot that we have next to no privacy anymore. I've even heard people talk about Huawei phones like, I don't care if the Chinese have all my info. What are they going to do with it? Now I use VPNs on almost every device I own these days, and I don't own a smartphone anymore. Just a flip phone that I can turn off whenever I'm not using it. I don't think I'd actually use voicemail in about a decade, but now I use it all the time. I just find it extremely creepy that we just sleepwalked into this state of affairs without any more thought than, ooh, my phone now has a camera, or ooh, now my phone has the internet. I used to think those conspiracy theory types were just a bunch of loons, but if they were right about our phones, what else are they right about?
I used to work at McDonald's. It's been a few years now, but I'll never forget my time there. Working in fast food can be crazy sometimes, especially at McDonald's, which is one of the most well-known fast food restaurants around. I remember that after getting hired, it took me a few weeks to get used to things. The job was just the second one that I ever had, and I was 17 years old and in high school. But after I got the hang of it, I started to enjoy working there. Most of my coworkers were nice, and we got along pretty well. There was one coworker, though, who seemed to get hired a few weeks after me. It was this guy who I will just call Joe for this story. Joe was about a few years older than me. I remember that I didn't really interact with him at work much. We worked the same time, maybe 3 or 4 shifts. Then, one night, I worked until 9 p.m. When I got off, after clocking out, I left the building. I had drove to and from work to my parents' house at the time in the old car that I had. When I got out into the parking lot to leave, though, I saw Joe standing there. He approached me and said hi. Joe then asked me for a ride, saying that he was stuck there and had no way to get home. I didn't see a reason not to, and I was quick to tell him yes, but I also realized that I hadn't seen him at all that day to that point. I didn't think he had even been working that day, so this seemed kind of weird that he was even here. After we both got into my car, he gave me his address and we left. We talked to each other a decent amount on the drive. He seemed nice for the most part, but also did seem a little bit strange. Something just struck me as odd about him and slightly uncomfortable. But nevertheless, we made it to his house and then he left and went inside. I then drove back to my parents' house. Now, maybe a week or so later, after working another night shift that Joe was not working for, I remember leaving again. I got inside of my car no problem though, but I remember looking around the parking lot and noticing a car with what appeared to be Joe behind the wheel. This car was parked in like the back corner of the lot, and it had been backed into a space. I was wondering what he was doing here again because he hadn't worked and I hadn't seen him. But I didn't really think too much of it, and then I backed out and I left. However, when I got to the stop sign at the end of the parking lot to turn onto the road, I noticed a car approaching me from behind. It was Joe's car. I guessed he was leaving now too, and I pulled onto the quiet road and he turned out right behind me. He then proceeded to follow me all the way back to my street. All I knew was that he didn't live over here because I had given him a ride before, and after all, it wasn't even close to this area. I was confused and also creeped out by this. When I approached my street, I went past another one. I wasn't really sure where to go, so I just went around the block. Then I pulled into some random driveway to turn around, but when I did, I noticed that Joe kept driving down the street. So I waited until he was gone, and then I left that house and I went home. I was confused by why he had followed me and what was going on with him. It was very strange. So fast forward to a few days after that. I was actually on my break at work at McDonald's and I got a text from Joe. There was a group chat for some of the employees, so that's how he had got my number. He asked me if I could give him a ride to work the following day. I mentioned this to a coworker, and I was told that Joe had already been fired. This creeped me out a little bit. I came up with an excuse and told him no. The next time that I worked after that, I found out that Joe had also been banned from the McDonald's now. Apparently, he showed up and got into a confrontation with our boss. I blocked his number after that in case he did anything more, and I never heard from him again. I only worked at the McDonald's for a few more months. Still, I wonder what would have happened if I agreed to give him a ride to the McDonald's. I wonder why he followed me home and why he was so strange. I have a crazy story to tell from one time that I went to McDonald's. So this was years ago now, and I went to McDonald's one Saturday in the afternoon. I live by the city, so there's a lot of people who live in the area. Many businesses are very busy on the weekends. So I walked inside of the McDonald's and I saw several long lines to order. It was nothing too crazy, but I was surprised at just how many people were there. So I got into the back of one of the lines and waited. McDonald's is usually pretty fast, and the line started moving quickly. I was really hungry and craving a Big Mac. As I waited and slowly moved up in the line, many people got in line behind me as well. I was watching the employees scramble to keep up with all the orders, and it was a hectic scene. So eventually, I was up next to order. That's when I heard a little bit of talking behind me, and I sensed somebody approaching. I turned around to look, just in time to see a man approaching me. When he saw me, he asked if he could just go in front of me quick, because he just wanted a glass of water and was really thirsty. I said sure, because obviously that wouldn't take long at all to just get a water cup. The man then stood in front of me and waited for the person at the counter to finish ordering. Once they had, the man stepped up to the employee behind the register. At first, I was kind of zoned out like I had been, just observing and waiting. But then, after probably 30 seconds, I snapped out of it and I realized what was strange. The man was just talking to the employee as if he was ordering. He wasn't just getting a water cup. I took a step forward and listened. I heard the man ordering food, and he was ordering quite a bit of things as well. He must have ordered enough food for 5 people. As he was rattling off more items, I tapped him on the shoulder. When I did, he did a half turn and then waved me off in the rudest possible way. I asked him what on earth he was doing, but he ignored me. The man was even looking at the menu and asking the employee questions about stuff. He took at least another minute and a half to order, and it made me really mad. When he was finally done, he walked away to wait, and I stepped up and I ordered what I was getting. After that, I went over to wait as well, and I saw the guy standing near the drink machine. I then confronted him, telling him that he told me he was just getting a water. The man said he changed his mind, and I told him that I never would have let him in front of me if I knew that. When I said this, the man just told me to shut up and then laughed in my face. Obviously, this made me angry, and I told him that he was a terrible person before finally walking away. But as I started to walk away, I guess the guy came up behind me because the next thing I knew, he splashed me with his drink. My hair got wet and a bunch of people saw it. It was embarrassing, but this guy also looked like a real jerk in front of all the people as well. I didn't bother to go after him and fight him or something. I knew better than to get into a fist fight at my local McDonald's, so I moved away and dried myself off. A couple people asked me if I was all right. Then I remembered that my order was called before the man's order. It was probably because he ordered so much more stuff than I did. I walked up and had to go past the guy who was standing right in front of the counter getting in everybody's way. When I got my order, he looked at me and I said to him, "Look who got their order first, loser." Then I started to leave. The guy did not say anything back to me. I then left the McDonald's and walked to my car. Well, I guess the guy followed me out. He must have been mad about what I said, because when I reached my car, I heard him approaching. I turned around, and this time the guy splashed his drink on my car. He then kicked my headlight, cursed at me, and walked back inside. I was furious, but the car did not appear to have damage, so I just got inside of it and drove home. It would only cause more problems to keep getting into it with this guy. Luckily, after that, I never saw him again. The whole thing was so stupid and crazy. I hope that guy learned a lesson, though, and is nicer to people. Last year, I went to McDonald's one evening. You see, I work from home and I live in an apartment building. One day, I had a lot of work to get done. However, sometime in the afternoon, when I still had a lot to do, my Wi-Fi cut out. I don't know why it happened, but after resetting things and trying to figure it out for a long time, I lost my patience. It still wasn't working, and there's a McDonald's just down the street from my apartment complex. It's so close that I can easily walk there, which I've done before several times late at night. Anyways, I took my laptop and left my place to walk to the McDonald's. I was hoping to use their free Wi-Fi and be able to get the work done that I needed. When I got inside, the restaurant was not very busy, which was nice. I set up at a booth in the back corner and was able to successfully connect to the Wi-Fi. I ordered a coffee and later on a little food, and I worked hard. Over the next few hours, I was able to get the work done that I needed to, and over time, the McDonald's got quieter and quieter as the night wore on. By about 9 o'clock, I was done with my work, and I was the only customer in the entire restaurant. They stayed open past midnight, but I decided to leave then and go home. So I packed up my laptop, and I headed out to walk back to my apartment. When I stepped outside, one of the first things I noticed was there was a man standing around sort of by the doors. He was wearing a sweatshirt with a hood and looking down. I glanced over, but turned and walked in the opposite direction. When I did, he almost immediately started walking after me, which got my attention. As I continued to walk, I noticed that the man started to trail me by about 30 feet or so. I then got onto the sidewalk, and just hoped that this man was not actually following me. After walking down the sidewalk for a bit, I looked behind me. I saw the man, still there and still about the same distance away. He was looking down, so I could not see his face. This was becoming more and more suspicious. As I approached my apartment complex, I did not want to let this man into my building, assuming that he was in fact following me. So I started to walk faster and faster. After making it to my apartment complex, I looked back and saw that the man was still about the same distance away. He must have walked faster as well. This was not good. I walked down the sidewalk inside of my complex, and I decided that I would not go through the front door. Instead, I walked towards my building like I was going to go past it. Then, at the last moment, I turned to the right and went to the side of it. There, it had a less used side door. I walked really fast, got to the side door, and I knew that I had one shot to use my fob to unlock it. Luckily, I got it right away, and I quickly opened the door and went inside. Then, as fast as I could, I closed it behind me. Right after the door closed, the man appeared right there and tried opening it. He couldn't get in. And clearly he didn't live there, because if he did, he would have had a key. It confirmed to me all my fears of the guy following. I felt grateful to be inside safely, and I wasted no time and I went upstairs to my unit on the second floor. When I got inside, I went to my bedroom window and I looked out. I saw the guy still standing there in the grass. He looked up at me and then flipped me off. I closed my blinds and I hoped to never see the guy again. And luckily, since then, I haven't.
It was about 2 a.m. and I was on the way to my job at my local McDonald's to open with one of my favorite managers. She told me to text her when I got there so she could let me inside. Sometimes we'd have to be there really early in the morning if someone from the previous shift had to leave early. However, those were rare occasions. Once I pulled in, I noticed a man standing outside of the McDonald's near the front door, his hands in his pockets while smoking a cigarette. He was shooting me this sort of menacing stare as if he were waiting impatiently for us to open. Let me point out that it was pouring outside, so I was really confused why this guy wasn't just sitting in his car. I then parked and texted my manager that I was here. Thankfully, she had an umbrella with her and walked over to me so we could walk in together without getting wet. I say my usual good morning, and she then rushed me inside saying, "Did you see that guy out there?" I told her I did, and we began wondering why he was outside in the rain. We assumed that maybe he was just on something and that he was waiting for us to open so we could get breakfast. However, that wouldn't be for another 2 hours until 4 a.m., which is around the time most McDonald's open here in Canada. My manager proceeded to help me refill sauces, napkins, and things like that. She then tells me that she's gonna be in the back office if she needed me. I tried my best not to think about the man outside and tend to my shift so that we could get ready to open. Right then, my manager calls me in from her office and tells me to come look at the security cameras. I go into her office and we both watch as the man from outside starts talking on the phone with someone in Spanish. It's not common for someone to be speaking Spanish in Canada, but it happens. The cameras outside do pick up audio, however, it's not the best and you couldn't hear it well. Now, my stepmother is Puerto Rican, so while I understand a fair bit of Spanish, I don't speak it. What he's saying on the phone, though, is horrific. For one, he knew my manager and I would be the only ones working, and he was planning on, quote, snatching our asses up. He then proceeds to pull out what appeared to be a large screwdriver from his coat and turns to face the door. That's when we both hear knocking on the glass coming from the door. My manager tells me to go to the door, but to not open it while she called the police. I walk out into the lobby and there he was, slowly knocking on the glass door with his hand behind his back. I motioned to him that we were closed and to come back later. However, he didn't seem to get the hint and just stood there soaking wet. I try my best to ignore him, but the sound of him pounding and scraping his nails against the door was petrifying. All of a sudden, I then hear him loudly say something from outside. Like I said, I only understood some Spanish, so I couldn't really understand it exactly, but it sounded like he called me cerda, which for those who don't know means pig in Spanish. No matter how many times I tried to ignore him, he'd always be there watching me through the window. Police in this area of my city don't take things like this lightly, so they arrived within 10 minutes. Once law enforcement pulled into the McDonald's, the man tried to run to his car. He didn't get very far, as police were able to tase him before he could drive away. My manager and I watch as police cuff this dirty-looking man while putting him into the backseat of a cop car. With very poor English and an angered tone, he claims that he was just hungry and that he wanted food. Though the screwdriver and the tape they found in his car said otherwise. As my manager made her statement in a police report, I see the man giving me that same menacing stare. I'll be honest, I got goosebumps just seeing him like that, as most things don't freak me out. It was a look of anger and hatred, like as if he had known we knew what his plan was and how he was upset that he was unsuccessful at it. I stayed at that McDonald's for another year after that incident. Police had said they would update us on everything, but nothing ever became of it. Thank you to my manager for protecting me, and thank you to my stepmom for teaching me Spanish.
I used to work at McDonald's. When I did, I was usually working behind the counter and taking orders. Well, a few months into my time there, and something really strange happened. I was still in high school at the time and living with my parents. The McDonald's that I worked at was only about 5 minutes away. This made it convenient and nice to work there. So one night, things were pretty normal. Like many times, it was quiet when I got to work at the McDonald's in the afternoon. Then, in the early evening, things picked up quite a bit and were pretty busy for a while. When it got to be a little later at night, it quieted down. But during the time that it was still kind of busy, but just starting to quiet down, I was inside taking an order. I remember that a customer was ordering, and during this time I noticed a person entering the McDonald's out of the corner of my eye. But I wasn't really focusing on them, because I was more focused on the customer who was currently ordering. After walking in though, this person started walking over as if they were going to get in line behind the person ordering. I noticed that it was a woman. Instead of getting in line though, she took out her phone and appeared to take a picture of me. It was really obvious. Then, right after doing so, she quickly turned around and walked right out of the restaurant. I must have had a surprised look on my face, because I remember the customer who had been ordering look at me and then turn around to look. By the time she looked though, the woman was walking out of the door. The customer asked what happened, and I told her that the woman had took a picture. At first, I wasn't sure if the woman was directing her picture at me or at the customer. We both thought it was weird, but then the customer finished her order. I was wondering for most of the rest of the shift why that woman took my picture. Maybe I had took her order earlier that day, and she either didn't like me or liked me, but I hadn't remembered seeing her at all, and I thought that I would. I would see so many people, I guess anything was possible, and if I had took her order the previous day, I certainly wouldn't remember. Either way, it was sure weird. So the next time that I worked was a few nights later. It was a very similar shift, and believe it or not, basically the exact same thing happened. Except this time, I was not taking anybody's order. I was just standing behind the counter by myself. Once again, the door opened. The same woman walked in. At first, I recognized her, but I wasn't sure exactly from what. After making her way inside a few steps though, I remembered exactly where I had seen her before. And then, she once again took out her phone and took my picture. This time, I asked her what she was doing, but she did not answer me. Very quickly, she put her phone away, turned around, and walked out. I was once more left very confused. I did not see her for the rest of my shift. I worked a few more times after that, and did not see her or have my picture taken that I was aware of. Then, one day, probably a week or so later, I got home from school. My mom said that there was a letter in the mail for me, and she showed it to me. There was in fact a letter addressed to me at the table, which my parents had got from the mailbox. I opened it up, curious as to who it was from. Inside of the envelope was just 2 photos. When I looked at them, I instantly recognized them. They were the 2 photos that the woman took of me working at McDonald's. There was no letter to go with it or anything, just the photos. There was also no return address on the envelope. It was so weird. I told my parents about it, and the next time that I worked, I told my boss. Everyone was confused and didn't know who would be doing it or why. But after that, I never saw that woman again. There were no more pictures taken of me at work or sent to me. Still, I never found out who did that or why. It's very strange.
I'm an 18-year-old female, and this happened back in 2009 when I was a freshman in college. I lived in a small city in the US, which was an overall safe area in my state. I even told my friends that even some of the criminals in my city were polite. Long story short, it was a neat little city that really deserved more attention. The people were nice, and sirens would almost never be heard. One night, a few of my college friends and I had just finished a concert from our school performed by a local band. They never made it big, but they were still well known around the area, especially if you were into music. Anyway, we leave the school trying to find somewhere to eat as we were practically starving. It was around 11 at night, meaning most places were closed, making it harder for us to find food. Eventually, we decided to go by a nearby McDonald's as we were dirt poor college students with little to no money. We enter the McDonald's and order our food and find a nearby table to eat at. For some context, there were 4 people. Me, my friend Emily, my friend James, and his girlfriend Samantha. As we're eating a total of 40+ McNuggets, I notice a man walk in hyperventilating as if he had just ran a marathon. He wore black sweatpants, a white shirt, and had on a backpack. Not that there was anything wrong with him, but something about him just made me feel uneasy. On top of that, he seemed disheveled with long messy hair and looked as if he hadn't been to the gym in years. Now, I'm not one to judge people, but there was something about this man that was just off. Not wanting to pry and too tired to care, I think nothing of it and just continued eating while talking to my friends. I nudge Emily and whisper in her ear if she thinks that man seemed off. She just so happens to agree with me and tells me that we should just not pay attention to him. We focus on eating our food while chatting with our friends when James turns around and made eye contact with the man. However, not even a minute after, he walks up to our table with a flashlight, smiling his smile. Hey there, weird favor. The toilet in the bathroom is overflowing. Can one of you help me with it? We all just kind of look at each other confused and say that we were eating and to ask an employee. He disregards our suggestion and insists we help him out. We politely decline and tell him no, to which he then asks once again. But before I was about to say something, James says in an annoyed tone to leave us the hell alone and to go away. His face went pale and he grabs a drink before leaving the restaurant. Samantha kept telling us as to how uncomfortable the man made her feel and that she's sworn she's seen him before. We begin to ask her if she was sure, and if she did, where she saw him. She said that she couldn't remember, but thought it was sometime last week. We eat for another 20 minutes before leaving to go back home when Emily says something I didn't realize. You know, he never went into the restroom in the first place. How would he know the toilet was overflowing? I look at her with this unsettling face, and that's when I immediately thought of the backpack. Upon realizing this, several questions came up in my mind about why he had a backpack. What were the contents of it? What were his intentions? And what would he have done had one of us gone in there? These questions bothered me for a good week when James saw a chilling news report. Apparently, the same tactic had happened at another restaurant, only this time it actually worked. The same man had tried the approach and managed to lure a woman standing by the men's restroom. He was able to pull her in and do things I won't mention until a few people helped break up the situation. The news showing the man's face on TV made James almost spit out his water as he saw this. James ends up calling the police to put in our tip and what had happened. Police in my city don't mess around, so whenever something bad happened, they were ready to stop it. Eventually, Samantha had remembered seeing the man at a pub she was at. He didn't do anything, but described him as being drunk and annoyed at the bartender. Needless to say, this news went around like wildfire around my city and even my school. What had once been this nice area with barely any crime, only to have something disturbing happen. For those of you wondering, yes, he was thrown in prison. I ended up staying away from that McDonald's for a good while until the paranoia faded. It wasn't until a year later where I learned a truth I didn't know. James and Samantha had moved away, and it was actually Emily who had told me this. During dinner one night with her, I had asked her if she had remembered about the man from McDonald's many years ago. Her eyes went wide, and she said she was going to tell me something she never told me. Turns out, the man had ended his life in prison not too long ago. He couldn't live with the pain anymore and just decided to end it. I was shocked when I learned this and really couldn't believe it. However, it was nice to know that he couldn't hurt any more people while knowing our city was much safer. Anyway, that's my story, and I hope you can all learn from this and help prevent it. If you see or feel something is off, you need to tell someone. There are truly some messed up people in this world.
A couple of years ago, I found myself in a very disturbing situation. I was getting off work at my student internship in Charlotte, North Carolina, and it had been snowing all day. Now, for all you guys who live in the South, you know it's a big deal when it even calls for snow, and grocery stores are raided the nights before. I decided to go and get some groceries to enjoy with my girlfriend, now wife, since the mayhem had ended and only people like me who had trucks or all-terrain vehicles could get around. I went into Walmart and got the groceries I needed to start my way back to my truck. It had started to snow harder, and there was already about 5 to 7 inches on the ground, and it was already 12 in the afternoon. I was daydreaming about sledding and watching movies the next couple of days with my girlfriend. Just then, as I had almost reached my truck, I was jolted by the act of someone grabbing my arm. As I turned around, I saw an older-looking lady who was maybe about 5'6". She asked me if I had a cigarette. Now, I don't smoke, so I told her I didn't, and then turned back to my truck. Again, she gently tugged on my arm. She then told me that she just got here from Alabama on a bus with her granddaughter and dog, and she was here for breast cancer treatment, and that she needed money for a hotel. Again, I honestly told her that I had no money on me, which I purposely do because I don't like donating to people's drug habits, and I would rather get people food myself if that's what they really wanted. At this point, she then said, "Do you know the area well around here?" Wanting to just get out of the situation, I just said no, I didn't, which was a lie, thinking that now she'd leave me alone. Then she asked, "Oh, okay. Well, since the weather is so bad, will you drive me to my hotel so I can meet up with my granddaughter and her dog who are in the hotel lobby waiting? It's right up the road here. I can show you. I'm a Christian, and I was always taught to help people out." So even though everything at this moment told me to deny this woman again, I told her sure, since I was raised on the rule, never judge a book by its cover. Plus, being a male at 6 foot, I figured I could take her on if things got dicey. So she jumped in my truck against all odds, and the next thing I know, she's smoking a cigarette in my truck, and I told her politely to please put it out. Being nervous, I missed my first red flag when she asked me for a cigarette, since she obviously had some. She obliged and threw the cigarette out the window to my dismay. So we started driving up the road towards her hotel, at which point I was on high alert. At the moment of going through worst case scenarios in my head, I noticed her fumbling through her purse searching for something and looking out of the corner of her eye at me. At which I told her, "Just so you know, I have a gun in my truck, so don't try anything crazy." Now, I did have a gun, but it was a shotgun that I had neglected to get out of my backseat a couple of days earlier, and in this reality, this would do me no good if she had pulled a gun on me at that very moment. At this, she stopped messing around in her purse and pulled out her cell phone in her pocket. Then she looked at me and said, "Actually, do you mind taking a detour? I need to pick up some money from some friends of mine." Okay, at this point in time, red flags were firing off. But again, never judging a book by its cover kept running through my mind. So I told her that was fine, but we had to make it quick because I really needed to make it home. Right at that moment, she dialed someone on the phone and said, "Yeah, this guy's coming over to bring me to get the stuff. You're ready, right?" At that point, I asked her to talk to the person. When I answered the phone, a man who sounded like he's been chain smoking since birth then said, I started asking him questions like, "What's your name?" And I asked him if indeed he knew of any hotels nearby. He seemed to stumble over his words and then said he had to go. At this point, I should have gotten a clue and kicked her right out of my car, especially after watching so many horror movies. This is usually when the person goes against their gut and pays for it. But for fear of her actually telling the truth and me feeling like a terrible person, I decided to go on. At this point, we turned down the street and saw a cop car sitting there off to the side. I wanted to drop her off with the cop, but I would really feel terrible if she actually was telling the truth. So I passed the cop, and she had this weird eerie smile on her face, then said, "Glad he's here, now I feel safe." Now, as we entered the apartment complex, I saw how run down it was. It looked to be a place where heavy drug traffic was going down. Just a very unsettling place, even during the snow. As I parked outside the place that she said was her friend's, she then said, "Okay, I'll go get the guy and I'll be right back." At this, I was very unsettled by everything. Things just didn't seem right. She saw my facial expression of wanting to just get the hell out of Dodge, and to this she sneered at me, saying something along the lines of me being a terrible person if I left her there, especially in this weather under her condition. At this, I just got mad. After all, I already went out of my way to help her. As I waited, I had started to think about things that could happen. What if she brought back a gun or worse? At that moment, I saw 3 guys coming towards my truck. I realized things weren't right. She had set me up to rob me or something because these guys were big, and one of them had something behind his back which I couldn't see. At that moment, I put the vehicle in reverse and took off. Thank God for 4-wheel drive. I looked back to them chasing me, and to see what was hidden behind the one guy's back was a crowbar. I don't know what would have happened to me, but now looking back, I see how dumb and blind I really was. There was no hotel anywhere close to the area I was in. The nearest hotel or motel was 20 minutes away. Had I waited for the guys to get to my truck, they probably would have beaten and robbed me, or worse. I thank God every day that I escaped and was able to get married until this event. After that, I've never been to that Walmart again, or the area for that matter. A couple of months later, I told a coworker this story, and he told me that a year ago the same lady tried the same thing to him, but he declined altogether. Smart move on his part. Be careful of who you help out, because some people will really take advantage of you, or worse. A few years ago, when I still lived in upstate New York, something really freaky happened to me. If you've ever been to upstate New York during the winters, you know that it can snow a lot. I usually just spent snowy nights watching TV. I lived about a mile or so from any other house, and my roommate was out. Now, I'll be honest, being alone made me feel uncomfortable. I've always had an overactive imagination, and random small noises really freak me out. Like I was saying, my roommate was out of the house and it was snowing heavily. It was probably like 9 or 10 at night if I can remember correctly, and I was watching TV just like normal. All of a sudden, I heard a crunch outside like someone was stepping on ice. This is night in heavy snow, miles away from any other house. I mean, who could possibly be outside? The footsteps just stopped at some point. I eventually fell asleep, and when I woke up, my roommate was now back. I went outside to see if I could find any evidence of who was outside, and what I found still haunts me. I saw footprints in the snow coming out of the woods and circling around my house. The footprints were filled in for the most part, so it was a bit hard to figure out where they were going. The scariest part of all this, though, is that the footprints stopped right outside my bedroom window. The other footprints were filled in, but these were fresh, as if someone had been standing there all night since the snow stopped early in the morning. To this day, it still scares me. I don't know what kind of person would be out in those woods. The fact that while I was in my room, they were standing outside my window still just freaks me out. I moved out of that house a few months later. So just over 10 years ago, I was fresh out of college and had moved back to my parents' house for the free rent and food for 9 months or so before I was leaving the state for graduate school. Now, my parents are super chill and gave me my own space in the house, but being a 22-year-old single guy and living at a house in the sticks is certainly not ideal. But I didn't have any other options, so I started looking for some work more to pass the time than to save up some money. Also, as a side note, my parents had just recently moved about 40 miles south of a major Midwest city. Anyway, so summer turned to winter, and I still hadn't found anything solid. But by then, I desperately needed to spend some more time out of my parents' house, so I took a part-time gig doing some light bookkeeping for a small business owner guy that my dad knew. I didn't really want to do it since it didn't pay that much, was short-term, and wasn't even a real office setup. But again, since my parents lived in the middle of nowhere Midwest, think acres and acres of farms, I knew that I had limited opportunities to make some cash, and this guy was going to pay me under the table as well. About that same time, a friend of mine in the city said that if I just paid him $200 a month and helped him clean up, he'd basically let me crash in his living room until I was ready to move out of state. That was all I needed to hear. I took the job. So my dad's friend's family had a construction type business. They helped out with building stuff a little, but it was ultimately more focused on renting out a few bobcats and large augers that they owned. Also other various drills, and then odds and ends like generators and other low-level construction or farming equipment that someone in that area couldn't afford to purchase but needed to use from time to time. This was a small mom and pop type thing where everyone knew everyone, and the office only opened on days that when someone was coming by, and was just generally a mutual beneficial situation for the business owners and the locals. Since I mitered in a business adjacent area and my dad recommended me, they trusted me to go there for about 15 to 20 hours a week and check and file the rental forms, make sure nobody missed the payment date if there was a payment plan in place, answer an email or two discussing prices and availability, etc. Super easy gig. The old building where I worked was about 90 years old and at the top of this little hill. The downstairs used to be an old country bar until the 1970s when this family bought it cheap, cleared out the bar, and fenced in the property to use its parking lot area to store all their rental equipment and gear. I could generally come and go as I pleased, work any hours I wanted as long as the work got done. So if things were slow and there weren't any rentals for a couple of days, I usually just go in after 7 and stay in until around midnight or 1, since I knew I'd be alone and could listen to music really loud and take my time and all that. The office where I worked was on the second floor of the building above the old bar and looked out into the long driveway. From my seat, I could easily see out the window, and once or twice saw a family of deer or a raccoon scamper by. And I always glanced out when I saw movement since it was very noticeable. It was incredibly remote, very still and quiet. So if something unusual occurred or if something felt off, I definitely noticed it. One night during winter, it had snowed a few inches, and my dad told me to stay in because the roads were bad. But I had an old SUV, and more than that, just really wanted to get out of the house. So I went into work at about 8 p.m., and I was going to stay until just after 1. I always left the gate open at the bottom of the hill, since believe me when I say that nobody ever showed up at night since we were literally in the middle of nowhere. I think the nearest occupied house was about 2 miles down the road, and even to turn into our short road, you had to only be coming to our specific building and probably know it was there beforehand. It really was a locals only type thing, and very small, since the family had inherited a lot of money and kind of did this rental thing on the side. Basically, someone would never get just lost and end up at our building. So anyways, I'm jamming away to some Fall Out Boy and having some coffee, and I kept glancing at the snow outside here and there, since our one orangish streetlight reflected on the ground at the gate and was causing the light to shine off the snow in a really cool kind of way. At one point around midnight, I went downstairs to the big bathroom to do my bathroom business, and then came back upstairs and got settled back into my work. I probably did about 5 minutes of work when I glanced outside and saw a huge imprint of something in the fresh snow just below the light. It seemed like it must have just been a huge dog or substantial animal that had just rolled around on the ground there on its back or something. Since I didn't notice it just 15 minutes before, it had to have happened while I was in the bathroom or maybe when my back was turned, since I would have seen that type of movement for sure. I shook it off and assumed it was a dog or maybe even a farm animal had gotten loose and maybe it was attracted to the light or something, as this was common as it was that kind of area. Who knows? At around 2 in the morning, I was leaving, and as always got out of my car to lock up the gate. And to be honest, I had pretty much forgotten about the imprint in the snow. But when I looked down, I was shocked to see that it wasn't just some disturbed snow, but it was undeniably the imprint of a human-made snow angel. If you don't know what a snow angel is, it's when kids lie on their back in the snow and push their arms and legs back and forth, so when they get up, it looks like the outline of an angel. I used to do this when I was a kid, so I 100% knew for sure that's what it was, and it was deliberately made underneath the light post. But it wasn't from a kid. It was from a very large person, or at the very least a normal-sized adult wearing tons of layers of big winter clothing. I looked up and I saw what I already knew, that whoever made this snow angel could easily look up and have seen me through that window, so they must have waited for me to head downstairs to make this angel. Now, I definitely would have seen or heard if someone drove up to our building, even if I was in the bathroom. So I knew someone had to have walked deep into the freezing and cold snow for a few miles, stopped in front of our building, and then do a snow angel in the small amount of time I wasn't sitting in the front of my desk window. I glanced around for tracks in the snow and saw that there was one set that led to the nearby woods to the right of the building, so it was clear the person didn't use the road, but instead came from the opposite side, which made me feel instantly uneasy, since that side was just trees and darkness for miles and miles. I was definitely a little freaked out now, since I realized that someone had just been this close to me secretly in the middle of the woods, and I looked around but didn't see anything amiss at all, and now I just wanted to get the hell out of there. When I got back on my car and drove a few feet, I realized that my boss would be there in like 4 hours and might see that same snow angel, and then assume I did it since he probably assumed I kept the gate locked when I was there. It wouldn't have been that big of a deal at all, but I was young, and I felt like I might be made fun of by him if nothing else. They were all very manly men. I liked books. So I opened the gate back up real quick, ran over, then kicked the snow around so it hid the angel, then locked it up again and went back to my car. Also, I should note this is really what happened at this moment, but I almost lied here and said something else since it seems fake. Since I assume the average person wouldn't actually get back out of their SUV and not just flee in their car because they're embarrassed about a snow angel. But at the same time, I was insecure and cared a lot about what others thought. So unfortunately, this is what I did. Also, I wasn't exactly fully terrified at this point, even though it was certainly unsettling. I just thought it was really weird and could have been an illegal hunter, even though hunting at night in the cold didn't really make much sense. Either way, the imprint was made 2 hours earlier, and I assumed they were long gone at this point. But that's when I heard it. When I was getting into my SUV, there was the loudest high-pitched laughing coming from the woods. It almost sounded like a fake laugh, like the witch in Wizard of Oz or something. Like someone was doing it fake on purpose to show how they weren't scared of me, or how I'd react at all once I knew they were laughing at me on our property. It was close enough that I knew they could probably see me, but I couldn't see them at all since other than the streetlight I was under, there was no illumination. After a few seconds of laughing, they stopped, and then it was just silence everywhere, except for my heart beating through my ears. Then the laughing started up again, though louder this time, more like screaming and laughing combined. I sort of froze for just like 5 seconds, listening in panic. Now, I spend a lot of time in that area, and I know what coyotes and foxes sound like at night with their high-pitched screeches during mating season, so I can't completely logically rule that out. But to me, it honestly felt like it was an adult man trying to emulate a woman laughing, like someone was deliberately trying to make a fake scary shriek laugh in order to scare someone. Well, it worked. After those 5 seconds, I immediately, filled with adrenaline, got in my car and drove the hell away from there as fast as I could without sliding off the road. Back at home, I was up all night trying to figure it out, and I even told my parents the story when they woke up. After talking it out, we all decided it was one of two things. It was either my brain somehow convinced itself that the snow formation was angel-shaped, when it was really just caused by some animal, and then the snow tracks and laughing was just a coyote or red fox. Though I don't think that's what it was. What I truly believe, the second thing, which is that some local was walking around for some reason and decided to mess with me. I didn't have any close friends left in that area that would do this, and if they did, they would have certainly brought it up to make fun of me for speeding away in terror. I found out later that the nearest house was a super old couple, so I highly doubt that it was one of them, which means that whoever went out in the woods at night in the freezing cold did it just to mess with a stranger. I don't have any mental issues or a family history of them. I didn't do drugs, and I drank socially at that time, but certainly didn't that night. I also don't believe in the paranormal, so I never once gave that a thought. In my heart, I know someone was out there. I worked there another 6 weeks or so and never had a single issue, though I knew where my boss kept his gun and I always made sure it was there when I started my shift. I certainly always locked the gate from then on. Thinking about this experience that night, the part that freaked me out the most was that he had to have waited around for me to leave for about 2 hours just to do that laugh. He didn't know me. I could have been crazy and the type of person to get mad and try and find and attack him. Yet he didn't seem scared or to care while he tried to mess with me. For some random dude, this is probably a story that he tells from his point of view to make all his friends giggle hysterically. But for me, that dude, the one I call Angel in the Snow guy, the one with the laugh that I'll never forget, well, hopefully I never encounter him or anything like this again.
He wasn't my blood uncle. He was my biological aunt's brother-in-law. My mom used to date sketchy guys when I was a teenager. I didn't live with her much because she was a horrible role model. So my grandmother raised me for a big chunk of my life, and I am thankful for that because she taught me many values and how to be a lady. I later moved in with my father and stepmother and my half-siblings when I was around 15, and I had a wonderful life with them. But let's rewind the clock to when I was 14. At the time I lived with my mother and her sleazy boyfriend named Dale. We were on the second story of a duplex. Her boyfriend had this friend who would come over occasionally, who looked just like the white guy from Jerky Boys. Same hair too. He always creeped me out because he kept staring at me, and I would always catch him in the act. My aunt lived down the block, and I would visit her quite frequently because she was one of those cool aunts. She was in her 20s, super fun, and had this 1969 Firebird convertible that she would drive around in and blast rock music. When I would visit her house, I would sometimes run into her brother-in-law. His name was Jeff, Uncle Jeff. He was renting out her basement. I kind of thought he was weird, but an okay guy. So one night at around 11:30, I was home by myself when I get a knock on the door. Our door had a square glass panel toward the top that was painted over, with a small peephole scratched into it. When I looked through, I could see that it was Jeff on the other side. I opened the door. "Oh, hey Jeff, what's up?" "Hey, is your mom or Dale home?" "No, mom's at work, and I don't know where Dale is." He then asked me to come downstairs because he wanted to talk to me. This didn't raise any red flags because I considered him family. I was also pretty timid and didn't like saying no to people, especially adults. So I follow him downstairs to the front porch. I see his car is parked and still running, with the headlights on. Sitting in the passenger seat with the window rolled down was the other creepy guy I alluded to earlier, Jerky Boy. I paused. What's he doing here?" Hey, relax. We just want to talk. We wanted to ask you something." He began to gently guide me toward the car. My adrenaline began pumping, and all of a sudden, I felt something wasn't right. I stopped and pulled back a little, trying my best not to look scared. Jeff kept talking sweetly, running his finger up my shoulder to fix my spaghetti strap. "Oh, it's okay. Just come closer to me. There's no reason to be afraid." I pulled away politely and said, "Whatever it is you need to ask me, you can ask me right here." He kept trying to convince me just to come to the car and said that if I was too scared, I could just stand in front of the headlights. The second he said that, my stomach did a leap, and my whole body started to feel electrically charged because I knew if I stood in front of the headlights, I would not be able to see, making it easy for one of them to grab me. At that very moment, I knew I was in a dangerous situation, so I started acting ditzy and dumb because I was afraid to let them know that I was onto them and that they were doing something that would land them in prison. And he would just grab me right then and there, cover my mouth, and drag me into the car so that I couldn't tell anyone. So I started to playfully joke around and said that I wasn't wearing shoes and that I didn't want to step in dog shit. I could see that Jerky Boy was now starting to come out of his car. Then I sprinted back upstairs, running as fast as I could and locking the door behind me. I was shaking so bad. Not a minute later, Jerky Boy is knocking on the door, and he's looking through the makeshift peephole. He starts saying that he needs to talk to my mom's boyfriend, Dale. I say that he's not here, so he stops knocking, but I don't hear him descending the stairs. 30 seconds after that, Jeff comes up and knocks, and is talking to me through the door, saying that he needed to talk to Dale, and then tries opening the door. However, it's locked. For the third time, I repeat that Dale wasn't there. "Oh, I'm sorry if we scared you, sweetheart. We just wanted to talk to you." That was bullshit. I was afraid that they were going to try to kick the door in, so I decided that I was going to try and sneak out the back. I walked toward the back door, and thank God I looked out the window first, because I saw the silhouette of Jerky Boy standing downstairs at the back door. So now, Jeff was at the front door, trying to sweet-talk me, and his friend was waiting out back. I know what you're probably thinking. Call the cops. I don't know why I didn't. I know it's stupid. I think it was because I was so naive and timid. Jeff was my uncle after all. I was also questioning myself and my own judgments, because Jeff kept reassuring me at the front door. So I returned to the front door, and Jeff is still there, telling me that he felt horrible for scaring me. I then tell him, trying my best to disguise any hint of fear in my voice, that everything was okay, and that I was so sorry that I got scared. I tried my best to placate him and convince him that I believed what he told me. They eventually left. and once the coast was clear, I snuck out and ran to a friend's house. I didn't tell them anything about what happened. I just said that I was scared and wanted to stay there until my mom got home. I did tell my mother about what happened, but nothing ever came of it. And thankfully I moved into my dad's house 45 miles away 3 months later. I never saw those two men again. When I was in elementary school, my parents worked long hours and wouldn't get off until it was very late in the day. I would stay in an after-school program that took place in our cafeteria. Not because I had to, but because it was more conducive with my parents' schedule. It usually consisted of doing homework and playing board games until around 5 p.m. Even then, some kids would be waiting around the pickup area for an hour or even more, and I would join them while a chaperone waited with us. I was almost always the last kid to be picked up, so whenever I would leave, so would the assigned chaperone. One day, the chaperone really needed to use the restroom. That day we were the last ones in the pickup area. He told me not to leave until he got back. So I was sitting there on the ground against the wall, when suddenly, a car pulled up. A bearded man in a flannel shirt and dark sunglasses lowered the passenger window and said, "Come on, let's go. Your dad can't pick you up today. I'm your uncle." I just sat there gripping my backpack, staring at him, completely frozen. I didn't recognize him, and I was scared, so I didn't say anything. I was confused and I didn't know what to do. Could this guy really be my uncle? Had something happened to my dad? The man seemed to get impatient, and with a stern voice, he said, "Get in the car now. Your dad got hurt. We need to go see him. Hurry." I still sat there, not moving. It was then that the chaperone returned, and as soon as he appeared, the car sped off. The chaperone wasn't able to get the license plate number and told my parents about it when they came to pick me up. From that day on, the school took extra precautions and assigned more chaperones to watch the children after school, which was a good thing. But I still wonder what would have happened if I believed him and naively went with him. He also must have been watching us for some time, because he showed up as soon as the chaperone left. This could have easily happened to a student who was younger than me, who wouldn't have known better. It's sad, but not everyone knows about stranger danger. Just watch your local news. When I was 15 years old, my great-uncle passed away due to a sudden heart attack. My father and I had to clean out his house since no one else in the family could do it. My uncle was loved by all of us and was one of the nicest guys you could ever meet. My father was broken up about losing him, but the job had to be done. His house was very neat and well organized, so we would be done in a day or two at most. I remember as a kid, we would play over at his house sometimes, whenever my parents had to work. He would allow us to play anywhere in the house, except for the attic. He made it very clear to us that going up and down the ladder to the attic was very dangerous. Therefore, we never went up there, and I never thought anything of it. Even though he would go up there sometimes for about 30 minutes, then come back down, never actually bringing anything with him or taking anything up there. While we were cleaning, I decided to finally go up to the attic just to see what was up there. It was completely empty, except for 2 boxes that were tucked away in a corner. Thinking nothing of it, I picked up the dusty boxes and took them downstairs to the living room. I opened them expecting to see some old papers because the boxes were so light. Instead, what I found were pictures. Hundreds and hundreds of photos of 3 different women. From all the angles, you could clearly tell they didn't know they were being photographed. He had pictures from daytime to night and from multiple locations. In some they were undressed, and in others they were doing everyday things like cleaning and cooking. My heart started to beat faster and faster. Looking closer, I realized one of the women was his wife, who had passed away several years earlier. I looked on the back of the pictures, and they were named. I didn't want to freak my family out without knowing what exactly I was looking at. So out of curiosity, I found the other two names of the women on Facebook. I was glad to find out that they were alive and okay. Once finding that out, I showed the pictures to my father, and he was just as shocked as I was. He took the boxes, and I've never seen them again, and we never spoke of it. Still, I find myself wondering why he had those pictures, and if he took them himself or had someone else take them. I loved my great uncle very much, and I couldn't imagine him being anything less than a stand-up guy. I don't know what to make of this, to be honest. I know this may not seem like a very scary story, but it most certainly freaked my father and I out pretty bad. Before I begin, I'm from Russia. My English isn't that great, but I'll try my best. I was really struggling on whether or not I wanted to share this story, because I am still disturbed and shaken up to this day. I grew up in a wealthy family. Both of my parents had enough money to get me into the best schools in Russia, and I remember going to many places during the summer breaks, and to this day, those are still my fondest memories. My parents had steady jobs, and they were mostly happy together. However, my father was never very fond of my mother's side of the family, especially my uncle and both of my grandparents. For whatever reason, they didn't get along with my dad. My mom tried pleasing everyone, lending them money, even though they would never pay her back. However, things got to a point where they turned on each other. My uncle really wanted my grandparents' house, even though he already had a huge house of his own. However, the house would go to my mother after they passed away, to square off any debts. He didn't really like this arrangement, but couldn't do anything about it. As fate would have it, both of my grandparents died in the same year. My grandfather had a condition where his left side was completely paralyzed. He slipped into a coma for a week before he woke up. His last words to this day have resonated with me. He told my uncle that he never got what he wanted because he was a greedy bastard. A couple of hours later, my grandfather passed away. My grandmother's health deteriorated not long after that. My mother became very depressed after this and was diagnosed with breast cancer the next year. Thankfully, she is still alive today, but she is not the same as she used to be. She had to stop going to work because she couldn't handle the stress. My father tried opening up a new business because he made the mistake of listening to my cousin. My father was hesitant at first, but my mother convinced him to do it. Since she didn't have a job, this could be something that she could occupy her time with. My father invested a lot of money into opening up this new business. My cousin was also heavily involved and influenced my father in all his investments. By the time he finalized everything, our financial future depended on this business being successful. He was risking a lot. By this time I was in high school, while my sister was going to college. This was when the worst possible thing happened to my family. The business that my father invested so much money into did not go as planned, and he ended up closing it down. He tried selling it off, but nobody bought it for the longest time. We were now broke and asking loan sharks for money. We couldn't go anywhere. I was too embarrassed to tell my friends or anyone else for some reason. While all this was happening, my uncle had moved into my grandparents' house and would ignore my mom's calls, even though my grandparents' will clearly stated the house belonged to my mother. My uncle built a fence so that nobody could trespass. The police were no help at all, and we had no money to hire someone to help us move him out of there, and we also couldn't fight him in court. As bad as things were, the worst was yet to come. We ended up being evicted from our house, unable to pay our mortgage with most of our things now belonging to the loan sharks. I spent an entire week homeless in the winter with my parents, and if you know anything about Russia, it gets rather cold there. These were the most painful days of my life. We ended up staying at a shelter. My mother tried ending her own life a couple of times, but we would always intervene. No one wanted to help my family. Until one day I got a call from a childhood friend. Her name was Olga. Her family agreed to take me in, until my parents got back on their feet. Olga's father had a close friend who was a lawyer and said that he would look into the case regarding my grandparents' house. My mother was the rightful owner, but the Russian police would not lift a finger until they had a court order, which would cost money, which is something we didn't have. That's how things work over here. For the next 6 months, I stayed at Olga's place, and we grew closer than ever, and even started dating. During this time, I eventually went back to school. The lawyer told my parents that he would be able to repossess my grandparents' house. On the day of the hearing, it took the judge 2 seconds after reviewing my grandfather's will. But my uncle still refused to cooperate, which was a big mistake. Here in Russia, the police do not mess around. I remember watching him being dragged through the snow, beaten until he was unconscious, and then thrown into the back of a squad car. Now you might think that this is where things get better, but as soon as my uncle was out of jail, he tried everything in his power to make us homeless again. He hired some people to break in and rob us. Rocks would be thrown at our windows, and we would be harassed in public. We tried reporting him, but we had no proof. My grandparents' house was very isolated, and not too many people were passing by, which made it an easy target. During a walk, my sister was almost assaulted by some men, but thankfully, she was able to get away. Once my father was financially stable again, he hired a private detective to monitor our house. They captured a photo of my uncle breaking into our house. My guess is that he ran out of money to hire people to do it for him. We reported this to the police and showed them the photos. He was charged with breaking and entering, among many other things, and was sentenced to 15 years in prison. My cousins and my aunt tried to contact us, and would leave messages on our answering machine, calling us the worst names possible, and that we should have died in the freezing cold, and that someday we are going to pay for everything that we did. But eventually they stopped reaching out to us. Thank God for that. Since the events of this story, I have finished college and was able to start a successful business with some friends of mine, and I'm doing well for myself. I just hope that whenever my uncle gets out of prison, he doesn't try to start anything with my family again. One morning, when I was in elementary school, probably 3rd or 4th grade, I was awoken by my mom in a rush. She had overslept, and since she always woke me up in the mornings, this meant that I too had overslept. And now there was no way I would be ready in time to catch the bus. My school started at 8 a.m., and the bus pickup time was around 7 o'clock, but it was already 6:40, and I was still in my pajamas, and I hadn't even had breakfast yet. So my mom decided that today, she would just tell the bus driver to go ahead, and she would take me to school that day, which would give me plenty of time to get ready. So I'm sitting there in the dining room, eating breakfast, still in my pajamas, and it's now around 6:50. We hear the bus pull up, about 10 minutes earlier than usual. My mom peeks her head out of the door into the foggy morning and waves the bus on. She closes the door and comes back inside, but the bus does not pull away. A short time later, we hear a knock at the door. My mom opens it and finds a man in a bus driver's uniform. He explains that he's a substitute driver because the regular guy called in sick. He tells my mom he knows he's a few minutes early, explaining that he wanted an early start since he didn't know the route too well. My mom explains to him that she's going to take me to school herself since we had woke up late. The man gets visibly upset and says that he could wait for a few minutes since he's already running ahead of schedule. My mom insists and says that I won't be ready to go in a few minutes and tells him to go on ahead. I remember that the man seemed angry about this, but turned around, got back on the bus, and left. I returned to eating my breakfast, and I still don't have my school clothes on at this point. But at 7 a.m. sharp, another bus pulls up to my house. Mom thought it was weird and goes outside to talk to them. She comes back inside, looking absolutely terrified, but doesn't say anything about it and just tells me to finish up and start getting ready for school. At the time, I didn't know what happened, but Mom would end up explaining a few years later. When she went to the second bus, she found that it was being driven by the regular bus driver, and it was full of the other kids that are usually on my route. The other bus was empty, by the way. My mom asked the driver about the substitute and about him calling in sick. "I never called in sick. There's no substitute driver on my route," he said. The driver immediately called dispatch in a panic and told my mom to go back inside and call the police to report this incident, which she did without me knowing. There was absolutely no one covering for my bus driver that day. Whoever it was most likely a kidnapper who had targeted me. I never heard anything about it again, or even if someone else had been abducted by this mysterious fake bus driver. But chances are, if my mother hadn't overslept that day, I would have never made it to school or back home. This happened in the 90s. When I was growing up, my mom was a horrible addict. She barely took care of me as a kid. At the time of this incident, I was around 6 or 7 years old, so my awareness and understanding of things may not totally make sense. One night, my mother and I were on a car ride. I wasn't sure where we were going, but it was late at night. Looking back now, I assume it was very late because there weren't many other cars on the road, and I was resting in the back seat. I don't even remember getting into the car. My mom drove up to some sketchy house and left me in the back seat for what felt like forever. Suddenly, the car door swung open, and someone violently grabbed me by my arm and yanked me out of the car. I began screaming and crying until the man looked me in my eyes and said, "Be quiet, don't try to run, or I'll kill you." He had a scruffy beard, and he looked absolutely insane. I was scared to death, so I listened. He held me tight by my arm, shut the car door, and walked with me down the street. I looked back at the house my mom was in, hoping that she would come out at the last second and save me. I stared at the house for as long as I could, as the man dragged me further and further away. As I walked down the street, I wanted to cry, but I was still in shock and too scared to do anything. I didn't even know what I was supposed to do, so I sniffled and cried as the man tightened his grip and yelled at me. I can't even describe just how frightened and confused I was. We walked for a little while longer and ended up in the projects. It was a bunch of buildings crammed together in a very shitty neighborhood. We walked into one of the buildings and up a flight of stairs. My legs and feet were hurting like hell at this point, but I was still too scared to stop moving or complain. We climbed up another flight of stairs when I saw some random guy smoking a cigarette in the hallway. Then, without warning, the guy that had kidnapped me fell to the ground. It happened so fast. The next thing I remember, the man that was smoking the cigarette was punching and kicking the kidnapper, in his head and his face. He then knocked him out cold. The cigarette guy picked up the kidnapper by the back of his jacket and threw him down the stairs. A little kid witnessing this kind of violence, an unconscious man being thrown down the stairs. To this day, I still have a fear of falling down the stairs. Once he hit the bottom, blood was everywhere. I still have no idea how the cigarette guy knew I needed help, but I'm glad he did. Maybe he saw the tears in my eyes. Maybe he just picked up on something and had a bad vibe. But he acted quickly. The cigarette guy was now pacing back and forth, swearing at himself, gritting his teeth, and clenching his fists. I thought maybe he was angry with me, so I started to cry. He then looked at me and said, Okay, shut up and stop crying. I wasn't as scared of the cigarette guy, but I still didn't want to test him. He began to ask me questions. Why are you out here this late? Where are your parents? And why would you talk to strangers? I was in so much shock and confusion, I couldn't answer his questions correctly. He then asked if I knew my way home, and I told him I didn't. In so many words, I tried to tell him about what happened, and somehow with the information I gave him, he knew where my mom's car was. I think he knew the area well enough to figure out where I needed to go. He told me he would take me back if I promised over and over that I wouldn't tell the police that I saw him or anyone that looked like him. This guy had an attitude, but I didn't care. I just wanted to go back to my mom. So I agreed. I followed him down the stairs. The bearded man was still lying on the floor, not moving at all. For all I knew, he was dead. The cigarette guy stepped over him, and I followed. He walked outside and nervously looked around. I remember him telling me, "The cops don't like me very much." He walked me out of the complex. He was going so fast that I basically had to jog to keep up with him. I started crying again, and he asked me what was wrong. I told him that my feet hurt, and I remember him sucking his teeth and begrudgingly picking me up and awkwardly carried me in his arms. We walked down the street for a while. I then remember him swearing and running behind a house as a cop car was driving down the road. He put me down and he told me to run to the police cruiser. I tried, but my legs could barely move and continued down the road before I could even remotely get close to it. The cigarette guy kept swearing under his breath as he picked me up again. He took me behind a lot of the houses and hid from every cop car that drove by. In retrospect, I assumed the police were looking for me. He carried me in both arms, running fast down the road. When I saw my mom at her car in the distance, she was surrounded by the police. The cigarette guy set me down and told me to run to where my mom was. Upon seeing her, I got so excited that the pain in my legs disappeared. I ran toward the police and my mother. She picked me up and hugged me tight. After I was reunited with her, the police began to ask me and my mother questions. I don't remember much about their questioning, but I do remember my mother telling them some convoluted story that didn't make any sense. She basically told me not to say anything, and being a kid, I didn't. I just sat there and cried. We went home after that. A few days later, my dad comes and picks me up. I told him everything, and after I did, I never stayed with my mom again. Looking back to that day as an adult, I never forgave my mom. Not long ago, I asked my dad what he remembers about the situation, and he told me what he thinks happened was that my mom was there to buy drugs, and I was kidnapped by somebody who just happened to be walking down the street. The person that saved me probably had warrants, and was not angry with me, but was just frustrated with the situation that he had to deal with. Imagine being a criminal on the run, and now you have to help a kidnapped girl after you just beat up her kidnapper and possibly killed him. If he would have gotten caught with me, he may have been charged for kidnapping. With my mom lying, and me being in shock and confused, I likely wouldn't have been able to tell the police that the cigarette guy was the one that helped me. Despite whatever crimes the cigarette guy committed in his past, he was the one that helped me that night, and for that, I'll be forever grateful.
My husband and I are both in our 60s and live together in a small house in Atlanta, Georgia. We weren't the type to go out anymore and just naturally enjoyed the peace and comfort of our own home. My husband owns a security camera business, and we made enough money from it to be able to retire without having the financial burden of money issues. My husband had gotten a call from one of his customers telling him that one of their cameras we installed wasn't working. I always enjoyed going with my husband anywhere he went, as him and I were both getting older and I wanted to cherish the time we had. We go to the address and fix their cameras, and on the way home we decided to grab food on the way. Now, we were driving in an unfamiliar area, so we didn't know what was around to eat that was good. Eventually, my husband points out that there was a small diner down the road that one of his friends had recommended. It had a nearly 5-star rating online, so we decided to give it a try. Right off the bat, it appeared slow, with the only people being us and a younger-looking woman sitting alone in one of the booths. She appeared to be in her mid-30s and seemed to be constantly alert about something. Looking out the windows, looking behind her, checking her phone, etc. We thought it was strange, but didn't think much of it as, let's face it, it's not our business or concern. A minute later, a waitress comes to seat us and hands us each a menu with some silverware. My husband proceeded to quietly tell our waitress if the woman in the other booth was okay. She then tells us that she came in over an hour ago crying, refusing to order any food, and has been acting like that ever since. Now, there's no real way to say this without sounding weird, but my husband is very nice. Like, he's polite, but always goes out of his way to make sure people are okay. Because of this, he gets up and approaches the woman who is now uncontrollably shaking. Right as he taps her shoulder, she abruptly screams, telling my husband to leave her the hell alone. I motion for him to come back, and he does just that, giving me a "what the hell is she on" kind of gesture. We order our food, and as we're leaving, we look at the woman one last time and see that she now has her head down sobbing. We drive back home, and we're in a constant worry about what she possibly could have been dealing with that would make her act like that. Drugs, a breakup, depression, we didn't know. Anyway, we moved on with our life after that until a few days later when we hear a knock on our front door. My husband went to open it, and standing on our stoop were 2 men in suits asking for our names. They were the FBI. "Were you both at the Soy Inn Diner on December 20th of this year?" they asked. Yes. "Do you know anything about this woman?" One of the men proceeded to show us a picture of the woman from the diner taken on the surveillance cameras. We told him that we had seen her at the diner acting all strange and not in her right mind. Turns out, the reason she was reacting the way we saw her was because of a pregnancy. She had murdered her newborn and disposed it into a wooded area right before coming into the diner. She told police that she was very religious and didn't want to get an abortion because of it. And with her not ready to have a baby, she did the only thing she could do, which was to get rid of it. Why she didn't put it up for adoption or why she had the baby in the first place is anyone's guess. All my husband and I know is that she is one sick, twisted individual. My parents both own a small family-owned diner in Nashville, Tennessee. They've been in the business for almost 20 years now, and while it's had its fair share of flaws from the pandemic, it's still in business till this day. This story is told in the perspective of my dad. This happened just a few years before I was born, and my dad sometimes uses this story as a way to teach us to never be too generous. At the time, my mother was undergoing a knee surgery, which made her unable to help my dad, meaning he had to do it all by himself. Having to run the place by himself for a good while was difficult, but he got the job done. One night, he had been working the front counter getting ready to close the diner like he always did. He had just closed the register when he hears the all-too-familiar door chime and sees a woman walk in. She appeared disheveled and clearly sober. He sighs, but being the generous guy my dad was, he offers to take her order. According to my dad, she seemed off in a way that he couldn't exactly understand, walking funny, looking up at the ceiling, and overall just lost. However, when my dad wanted to take her order, she sort of snapped back into reality and gladly told him what she wanted. After placing her order, she handed him a crumpled up $5 bill and proceeded to hand it to my dad. Now, the original bill was over $10, but seeing as she was clearly out of it, he decided to help her by telling her it was free and that she could go. Like I said, my dad is very generous, so when he saw that someone was in need, he did what he could. The woman gave him a nod as a way of, I guess, saying thank you and left the diner down a sidewalk until she wasn't seen anymore. My dad thought of it as rewarding for doing a good deed, even though he technically lost a sale. Having grown up in the South, it wasn't uncommon to come across people like the woman, that I know for a fact. About maybe an hour or so goes by, and my dad is sitting on one of the booths drinking a coffee, just keeping to himself. And that's when he hears tapping coming from the front door. He turns around and it's the same woman along with two other men he hadn't seen before. The three of them are looking into the diner trying to find my dad. Thankfully, the lights were off, as my dad for some reason always enjoyed spending his time in the dark, so they didn't see him. The only reason why my dad was able to see them was because of the light coming from the parking lot. All of a sudden, he sees one of the men smash open one of the windows with a crowbar and jump inside. By this point, my dad was hiding under the table, praying to God none of them find him. He hears one of the men tell the other to find the light switch and that if they end up finding him, they would kill him. Now, the light switch could only be turned on from inside of the kitchen, which was sort of hard to find unless you were actively looking or knew where it was. Minutes felt like hours as my dad hid underneath the table, trying not to make a sound, praying they wouldn't find him. Now, my dad is a soft teddy bear and never enjoyed the idea of fighting. Plus, he didn't know what they were even capable of. All of a sudden, he hears the sound of police sirens in the distance and watches as all three of them bolt out the door with the register. The police came a few seconds later and questioned my dad about what had happened. Unfortunately, however, it was too dark to give an accurate description of them except for the woman. It turns out that there had been a homeless person nearby who had seen them break in and called the police. My dad ended up giving him a week's worth of food in exchange. A month later, police had arrested 3 people in the area after attempting to break into a nearby gas station. Lo and behold, it was the same people who broke into the diner. I guess they had some sort of a Bonnie and Clyde type trio going on. It was later revealed that the 3 of them had been arrested for not only robbing the diner and gas station, but also a bank, pizzeria, and even a nail salon. What scares my family the most about this is that there was a very strong possibility that my father might have not made it home that night had he been found. When I was a teenager, I worked as a waitress at a local diner in my hometown of Cincinnati, Ohio. Don't even get me started with the Ohio jokes. I was 19 years old at the time and had just started my first semester in college. I would commonly work at the diner during the weekends as I had classes during the week. It was this small 1950s style diner that was a popular hotspot in the area. Because the weekends were our busiest days, those were the days where they really needed me the most. One night, one of my coworkers had called out sick and my manager had asked me to cover. Being the broke-ass college student I was, I figured I could use the extra hours. Mind you, this was on a Wednesday night, meaning this was during the week. I had never worked a weekday shift, so I really didn't know what to expect. For the first few hours of the shift, it was like any other night. You'd have a group of people come in, some individuals, and even that one person coming in for a simple coffee. Now, let's fast forward till around 11 p.m. We were set to close in an hour, and my manager had instructed me to start wiping down the tables and putting the chairs away. I was in the middle of putting the chairs up on the table when I see a man walk in by himself. He appeared to be in his mid-40s with a long gray beard and wore a hat that really stood out to me. On his hat read the word Hoyt in big bold letters. I'm not sure why that stuck out with me the most, but for whatever reason, it did. He approaches the front counter and starts mumbling to himself while shaking his arms. One thing I did notice was that he kept on repeating the name Ashley in a very direct tone. In fact, that was pretty much the only thing he said. I have no idea who Ashley was or why he was saying that, but I could only assume he had some sort of disability, so I immediately felt sympathy for him. My manager motions for me to take his order, and I walk over and ask him what he'd like. His eyes seemed so lost and kinda stared at me in a way I didn't feel comfortable with. He stares at me for a few seconds before pointing up to the menu screen above me, though I wasn't sure what item he was pointing to even after trying to guide him. Now, he obviously couldn't speak, so my manager and I tried to help him decide, to which he then gave up and left the diner without saying a word. I couldn't help but feel bad for him, but at the end of the day, there was nothing I could do. 12 o'clock came sooner than expected, and I clocked out just wanting to go home and get to sleep. I thankfully made it home safe with no problems and practically threw myself onto my bed. Now this is the part where things get absolutely insane. I was asleep for a good 2 hours or so before I awoke to a phone call from an unknown number. I take a look at the time, which read 3 a.m. Why would someone be calling me this late at night? I thought. I could only assume it was bad news and answered the phone with a groggy voice. Almost instantly, I hear the all too familiar voice at the end of the line repeating the name Ashley. I remember letting out a huge gasp before hanging up and feeling like my whole world was falling apart. Trust me when I say I didn't get a minute of sleep that night as my constant paranoia crept through me. I have no idea how he managed to find my phone number and call me. Hell, he didn't even know my name as I wasn't wearing my name tag. The sight of the sunrise practically lifted the weight off of me, where I finally made the decision to quit my job. I called my manager that morning and told her I quit. No more late night shifts at the diner for me. Now, I would have just contacted the police, but what were they gonna do? Besides, the call I got was labeled as no caller ID. Also, I don't mean to sound rude by saying this, but the police in my area aren't really the best when it comes to solving stalker issues. I know this because I've dealt with it before, but nowhere as near as close to this. I never ended up telling my parents about it, as they'd only add more pressure to the situation. Nothing has happened since then, and I really hope it stays that way. I now work at a grocery store and hopefully never have to see anyone wearing a hat that says Hoyt.
When I was 18 and freshly broken up with my way older boyfriend, I basically went crazy with dating guys. At the time, I also dressed very goth, even going as far as to wear a real corset and trench coat, mostly just enjoying the attention. One particular afternoon, my friend and roommate at the time decided to eat at a local Japanese restaurant with both of us all dressed up. Our waiter was a mediocre skinny white guy who clearly was a little alternative, but it was hard to tell really with the uniform. We had joked about me leaving my phone number on the receipt or something, so I hyped myself up, and I did so. Later that night, he had sent me a text. We had talked for a few days, never really having a right time to meet up, as I worked 40 minutes away from where I lived. He mentioned that the boots he wore meant a lot to him, and some other odd things that just seemed like edgy jokes. One really late night coming home, I was texting and driving, as any 18-year-old does, and we decided to meet up. My stupid self invited him over to my apartment where it was just me and the roommate who had been with me before. Our other two roommates were not home yet. At first, it was fine because I was already drunk, so I would just let him rant about whatever he wanted. He kind of just went on and on about his life, going to jail, medical bills, his parents, and more. Eventually, he asked me if I wanted to see his tattoos, and I was just like, sure, why not? He lifted up his shirt, and not only could I see the handgun tucked in his waistband, but also that he had multiple badly covered up Nazi tattoos. One was just slightly covered with a banana. I don't know what it was, but I had simply decided the best way to deal with the situation was to appease him, so I just went along with it casually. I don't remember exactly every detail because it was over 2 years ago and I was drunk. But he ended up pulling his gun out and putting it to my head, asking me if I was scared. I was immensely confused and I tried to call his bluff, saying I wasn't, which got him to put it away for a while. When we went to hook up in my messy ass room, he had pulled his gun on me yet again, saying he wanted to do it with it out. I got mad and I had tried to fight him off me and get it away from my head. Of course, I wasn't as strong as him, and he had hit me in the arm with it, which that shit really hurt because it was a nice one. When I finally got him off of me and he realized I was pissed, not scared, he had started acting like a crackhead, saying I was crazy for not caring about him pulling a gun on me. He ran off, jumped the fence of the apartment complex, and not even taking his car that he had come in. In the morning, his car was gone, and I had a large bruise from where he had hit me. While to me it's a funny story, I do now realize how bad it could have ended up. So, to the crazy-ass waiter from the Japanese restaurant, I don't think I want to see you again.
Years ago, for a short time, I worked at a movie theater near where I lived. I was a teenager, about 17 or 18 years old, and lived with my parents. One night, I was working late. I worked in the concessions at the theater and would sell popcorn and candy and stuff to moviegoers. On this night in particular, when it got sort of late, things quieted down and some of my coworkers left. It was then just me and my coworker Adam, who was a couple of years older than me and was working at the front selling the tickets. On most nights, about 15 minutes after the last movie of the night started, Adam or whoever was working at the front would lock the doors. Then I would stay at concessions until the movie was almost over. We would clean, and after the movie ended and everyone would leave, we would finish our cleaning and go home. So on this night in particular, I remember that the final movie of the night had started. When that happened, the lobby pretty much cleared out and I was by myself. A short time later, about 15 or 20 minutes into the movie, I looked to the front, which was a little ways away in the lobby, but I could still see. Adam was not by the doors where he sold tickets, so I assumed that he had locked the doors already and had moved on. He was most likely cleaning an auditorium that was empty. I had to stay at the concessions for a while longer though. As I stayed there, a couple of minutes later, and I remember seeing the front doors to the theater open. A man walked in who immediately looked sketchy. He was wearing a brown jacket and winter hat, and the guy looked down at the floor as he entered. He was walking rather fast, and I realized that Adam must not have locked the doors. I was sort of annoyed about that, but there was nothing that I could do. The man walked right past the ticket counter and then started in my direction. However, he turned and blew past me as well, not even looking at me. It was like he was on a mission to get someplace. He was headed to the hallway with the movies in them. There was only one movie still showing, and I wasn't sure if this guy was going to try to get in and watch it for free or something. I stayed where I was for the next bit of time, and nobody came to get any snacks. So when the movie was almost over, I turned the lights off to my concessions counter and then finished cleaning it. After that, I went over to find Adam. He was in fact in one of the auditoriums cleaning. I told him how the guy had entered, and Adam realized that he had forgot to lock the door. He then went back and locked it finally, and luckily nobody else had got in. When I went to the main hallway, I didn't see the guy, so I assumed that he had gotten into the movie that was playing for free. Adam and I went back to work after that until the movie was over a short time later. When that happened, everyone left the theater and made their way out. Within 10 to 15 minutes, everybody was gone, and Adam and I were the only ones there. Or so we thought. We went into the auditorium that the movie had been in and cleaned it. When we left, we noticed something. At the far other end of the hallway, a long ways away, the same man who I had seen enter the theater was standing there. He was facing us and just staring right in our direction. It just looked really strange because he wasn't doing anything. We started to walk a little closer to the guy, and I felt nervous about the whole situation. We had never had anybody really hang around that long after close before. I called out to the man saying that the theater was closed now and he would have to leave. He did not respond though, he just kept standing there. Adam and I moved away into the lobby, and I told him how that was the guy who had walked in when we were supposed to be closed. I walked back into the hallway to see that the man was still standing there in the same place. Then he started waving at me. It was not a friendly wave though. The man did not really have any expression on his face. It really creeped me out, and I didn't know what to do. I went back into the lobby and told Adam that we needed to get this guy to leave. We decided to go back into the hallway once again, where once again the man was still standing there in the same place. He waved at me again as well. The man then started walking towards us. We were both really creeped out and didn't know what he would do, but it seemed like maybe he would leave because he was walking in the direction of the lobby. So we went back into the lobby, but the man never entered it. After a few minutes, I went back into the hallway. The man was finally gone. I didn't see him. Adam and I then carefully searched the entire theater up and down. The man was not found. He must have left out another exit. We were just glad that he was gone. We then finished up and left for the night. I didn't work there too much longer, and that remains the scariest thing that ever happened while I worked there. Something really creepy happened a few months ago when I was on a road trip. I found myself driving really late at night because I was trying to find a hotel. I had stopped at a gas station, but I had no service, so I started driving to hopefully get service in the next town. However, I must have really been in a dead zone because as I continued driving, I just didn't have any service. After driving for like 20 more minutes, I took the next exit to try to find a gas station again. I still didn't have service, and at that point, I was just going to buy a map or see if the worker at the gas station knew of any nearby hotels. So after taking the exit, I did not immediately see any gas stations or anything really. I kept driving and then took another road, hoping that it would be more promising, but it wasn't. This road appeared very quiet, and very shortly after turning onto it, I noticed something strange. There appeared to be two men just sort of standing in the middle of the road. This was confusing. They did not appear to be construction workers right off the bat because they weren't wearing reflective vests or anything, and they also did not appear to be police. As I got closer, I saw that they were just wearing regular clothes. However, they both looked right at me as I approached them. I thought they might move off to the side of the road or something. Nothing appeared wrong with the street, and this was not a road that had a sidewalk on it or anything. There was woods on both sides, and it didn't seem like anybody would be out walking around there. The men stood there in the middle of the street, blocking me from passing. I came to a complete stop, and I had a bad feeling about it. I decided that it would be best to just leave. But before I did, I saw that the men were walking towards me. I lowered my driver's window a little and asked what was going on, but they didn't answer me. They just continued approaching. One of them was going towards each side of my car. I then hit reverse and started slowly backing up. One of the men went faster towards me, and I saw the other guy going to the side of the road. At that point, I turned to try to turn my car around so that I could drive the opposite way. I was far enough from the men that I didn't think they would catch me in the small amount of time that I would be stopped. So I went slightly off the road, stopped, put my car into drive, and then I started going the opposite way. By now, one of the men had gotten within 30 feet of my car, and the other was a short distance behind that. But the second man was now holding something large. I hit the gas, not knowing what it was, and started to drive away from there. In my mirror, as I was driving off, I saw the man go down and slide the object. Whatever it was slid pretty fast, and it almost reached my car, but it went off the road right behind me. That's when I realized it was probably a spike strip, the stuff that police use to pop a suspect's tires in a chase. So these guys were trying to pop my tires, but I knew that these men were not police. I kept driving away, and I got onto the next road which led to the highway. Then I tried calling the police, but I still had no service. I got back to the highway and drove down for a little while. About 15 minutes later, I finally had service again. Then I called the police. I told them about it, and they said they would go over and look into it. The men were probably gone by then though, and I never heard anything more about it. I was able to get to a hotel that night, and then continue with my road trip. This is something that still freaks me out to this day when I think about it. I'm not sure if those guys were trying to rob me or what, but I'm just really glad that I got away from them. One night, in the middle of nowhere, I had a freaky situation happen to me. I was visiting my grandma, who lived out in the middle of nowhere. She had a house on the lake, and to get there required driving down a long dirt road for many miles. It wasn't a very popular lake, so she didn't have any neighbors, the closest houses being at least a mile or two away. Because it was such a long drive, whenever I visited, I would just naturally stay the night in her guest bedroom so that I wouldn't have to drive long, tiring hours in the darkness. One night when I was visiting my grandma, I was sitting out on her back patio just hanging out listening to music. It was close to midnight, and my grandma had gone to bed already, so I was just enjoying the nice night air while sitting outside on my phone. Over the sound of my music, I thought I heard something banging or clanking around. There was a steady breeze that night, so I just expected it to be the wind moving something and making noise down by the boathouse. However, as the night continued, I also saw some quick flashes of light from down by the dock and the boathouse, and I knew that somebody had to be messing around down there. I was nervous because I was out in the middle of nowhere and isolated enough that there shouldn't be anybody nearby, let alone looking around down by my grandma's boathouse. I thought about calling the cops, but decided against it because it would take over an hour for them to arrive most likely. Instead, I turned off the music and went inside to grab my grandma's revolver, which I knew she kept loaded. Upon coming back outside the patio, I saw occasional movements of light down by the boathouse, so I decided to confront whoever it was now that I had a weapon. I called out to stop messing around by the dock and to reveal themselves and leave the property. I assumed that whoever it was would simply just leave without revealing who they were, but to my surprise, the figure of a tall, skinny man stepped out onto the dock. Illuminated by the moonlight, all I could see was his figure at first, but as he approached, I saw that it was an older gentleman. He casually began walking up the dock and towards where I was standing on the back patio, as if he had been doing nothing wrong. He didn't say anything as he slowly kept approaching, so I yelled out to stop and leave the property or else I'd shoot. I thought for sure that would be enough warning for him, but he just kept coming up the lawn towards me. I finally took a warning shot right above his head to stop him from advancing. After I had fired the shot, he put up his hands and spoke to me for the first time, saying to take it easy and relax. Fully creeped out by the demeanor of this old skinny man, I told him to leave immediately or I would shoot him. The man stood still for a couple seconds, and I thought that he might start walking towards me again and I'd have to shoot him. However, he turned back and walked out into the woods, back down to the left of the dock, and disappeared. I was worried the rest of the night and didn't get much sleep, half expecting him to come back, but he never did. I'm not sure what his deal was and why he was so comfortable and nonchalant about approaching me while at gunpoint. The following morning, I warned my grandma about it, just in case he ever came around again. This happened to me 2 years ago, and I still remember it like it was yesterday. I live in the countryside of Ireland, far from the nearest town, out in the middle of nowhere. It's usually pretty quiet, which is nice. Most nights, The only sounds I hear are the occasional cow escaping the field next door or my dog barking at someone walking by. But about 2 years ago, I heard something really strange. It was late spring, and the night sky was clear. I remember stepping into the kitchen around midnight for a snack. As I rummaged through the cupboards, I began to hear noises outside. At first, I thought it was just an animal, but the sounds only grew louder. I opened up the window to listen better, and I saw my dog standing by the back door. She wasn't barking, which was strange because she usually barks at anything, especially animals. Instead, she was focused on the forest behind our house. The noise was hard to describe, but it was like metal being scraped, but it had a croaky quality to it. I didn't like it, and the fact that my dog was scared made me uneasy, because she was a big dog and not easily frightened. I couldn't understand what could be out there, so I decided to bring her inside and go to bed. But as I lay in my room, the sound seemed to follow me. It shifted to the front of the house, which didn't make sense. I shut my curtains, hoping to block out whatever was outside. Just as I got comfortable, I heard a tap on my window. It was soft at first, but then it became a steady tapping noise. It sounded like stones being thrown against the glass. I stayed under the covers, just listening and hoping that it would stop. It went on for what felt like an eternity, but eventually I fell asleep. The next morning, I mentioned the night to my neighbors. That's when I found out a man had moved into a house just around the corner. They said he wasn't exactly a law-abiding citizen, and he had a history of trouble with the law, so much so that whispers about him being a drug dealer floated around. About a month later, a massive stash of drugs was discovered in a shed nearby, and we never saw that man again after that. Thinking back, I can't shake the feeling that he might have been trying to scare me that night while he was high or something, but it was just all so strange. Like, how did he create that sound for hours? And how did the sound move around the outside of my house so quickly? What unsettled me the most was the thought of what could have happened if I had gone to check on the noise. I'm still not 100% sure of what it was, but it freaked me out.
A long time ago, my job had an office near the Canadian border in Washington State. I often had to travel up there to help train staff. Being a bachelor in my late 20s and liked getting away for a few days, I was always up to making some extra cash by volunteering to go whenever help was needed up there. I would usually fly up there, but there were a few occasions where I would have to bring some equipment with me and would drive. This one particular time was about 17 years ago. We had bought a bunch of equipment wholesale and would have to be delivered, along with some other odds and ends, to our office in upstate Washington. Of course, everyone knew that I would volunteer for the drive. I would be driving a box truck up there and would have to fly back. Prior to this, I would always drive a company car or an SUV, but I wasn't too worried. The box truck wasn't that big. I always preferred to start my journey toward the end of the day because I'm one of those people who like driving at night. For the majority of my drive, it was uneventful. I only stopped at gas stations and the occasional rest stop whenever nature called. At some point near the California-Oregon border is when things started to get strange. It was approximately 1 o'clock in the morning. I had to stop at a rest area. It was probably the last one on the California side. In the far distance, I do remember seeing some truckers parked. But basically, the rest of the parking lot was empty. Now at this point, I wasn't really thinking anything was creepy or out of the ordinary. I get out of my truck and go to the restroom to take care of business. I took my time because I wanted to stretch my legs a bit. Once I made my exit and began walking back over to my truck, I noticed that there's a vehicle parked next to mine. This entire parking lot was open, and this person pulls up right next to me. I thought it was odd, but I brushed it off and jumped back into the truck to continue my journey. About 10 or 12 miles down the freeway, my truck begins to act funny. The interior lights begin flickering. A little while later, all the lights in the vehicle go out. The interior lights, the taillights, and the headlights. At this point, it's about 2 a.m., and I'm driving through a forested area in southern Oregon. I was more angry than scared at that point, driving 60 miles an hour in the middle of what seemed to be like a scene out of Tales from the Dark Side. I pound my fist on the dashboard and scream at the truck. Almost instantly, everything came back on. At the next rest stop, I decided to pull over again. All the adrenaline made me had to take another piss. I jumped out of my truck and went to the restroom, although this time I didn't take as long inside. When I came back out, I remember thinking that I should stay there until dawn. As I approach my truck again, I see an older guy, somewhat heavy-set, gray hair. He was standing next to my truck. I didn't see a vehicle near mine, but I just assumed that he was out stretching his legs. As I get closer, he starts up a conversation, saying something about the weather. A very light snow was falling, but not the kind of stuff that stays on the ground. I wasn't really paying much attention to him, because my first impression was he was just a lonely old guy who wanted to chat, and I really wasn't in the mood. He then said something that made my hairs stand up. As he was looking at my truck, he says, "Are you having some mechanical problems?" I stopped in my tracks, and I felt all the blood rushing to my head. I just said, no, it's working fine. I just stopped here to use the restroom." "Oh, well, I don't live too far from here. You're more than welcome to join me for a hot cup of coffee, or maybe you want to rest on the couch for a while." This guy had no idea who I was, and he was inviting me into his home? This kinda gave me the creeps, but I kept it to myself. So I basically ended the conversation with, "No thanks, I better get back on the road before the snow gets worse." As I was driving away, I see that he's walking behind the restrooms, so I think to myself, what the heck was that all about? My mind is racing and retracing my last few stops. How did this guy know that I was having mechanical problems with my truck? I suddenly thought back to the rest stop in California, and remembering that car that was parked next to me. Could he have done something to the wiring of my truck while I was in the restroom? A few more miles down the road, I wasn't having any new problems with my lights, but I did have to stop at a gas station to fill up. In the state of Oregon, they don't let you pump your own gas, so while I was waiting for the attendant, I decided to go in and grab a drink. As I was waiting for my fueling, I walk around my truck and look for any signs of tampering, and then noticed up near the front fender of the truck, I could see some smears that I wasn't really sure of. I just told myself, "You're just freaking yourself out." As soon as the attendant filled up my tank, I jumped back into the truck, and just as I was pulling out of the gas station, I see a car parked in the corner of the gas station's parking lot. Someone was inside, staring at me. I tell myself that I'm just being paranoid, but this car looked a lot like the one that I had seen in California. Was that old man following me? Was he waiting for the right time and place to sabotage my vehicle? As I continued driving, the snow became a bit more concerning. I didn't grow up in an area that had heavy snowfall, but I did have a little bit of experience driving in the snow, but not enough to know when things became too hazardous. I looked out my rearview mirror and see a pair of headlights trailing behind me, which was odd because most drivers just passed me up, but this person was tailing me. I was already going well under the speed limit, and I slowed down a bit more, but still, the driver was not passing me. I was approaching Portland, Oregon. It was still dark out, and the snow was still lightly falling. I decided that I would pull over again, and maybe the car that was behind me would pass. I take the next exit, and in front of me is another gas station with a patrol car parked out front. I immediately pulled up next to the cruiser and got out. There was a lady police officer there, and I start making a conversation with her about the snow and the expected conditions. I was thinking about telling her about the car behind me, but suddenly I felt kinda silly about it. What was I going to say? "Hey officer, I think I'm being followed by an old man who may or may not have done something to my truck." She was very nice, and she asked me where I was going and where I came from. I kept looking around to see if I could spot the car, but it was nowhere in sight. She suggested that I stop for the night and starts telling me about the dangers of driving without proper sleep, and tells me that if I go down the road a couple blocks, there was a motel behind a gas station. I decided that she was right. The stress of this entire situation was exhausting. Hopefully by the time I get back out on the road, the snow would be gone and I would be more rested. As I pulled up to the motel, I decided to park my truck behind the building so it wouldn't be seen from the road. I go to my hotel room as quickly as I could and lock the door. Honestly, I didn't get much rest. I stayed up and watched TV and nodded off here and there, jumping at every noise I heard outside. My mind kept racing back, recalling all the events from before the California border, up to my conversation with a police officer. Maybe he saw me talking to the cop and decided to back off. Maybe he was waiting for me to pull over at another rest stop to carry out whatever his plan was. Why would a stranger invite another stranger into his house in the middle of the night at a rest stop? And why did he ask if I was having problems with my truck? This all felt too strange to just be a coincidence. Finally, at around 7 a.m., I decided that enough was enough. I got up, had myself a big breakfast before checking out of the hotel, and continued on my trip to the office. Thankfully, nothing else strange happened, but I always wondered about that night. Call me paranoid, but something deep down tells me that I interrupted that old man from doing something else to my truck at the rest stop in Oregon. Maybe he was part of a robbery plot for whatever was in the back of my truck. I guess I'll never know. I just feel like I avoided something terrible happening to me.
This happened back when I was 8 years old. Back then, I had a friend named Max. Max and I were friends from school and would hang out at each other's houses. I remember that one Friday night, I got invited to sleep over at his house. For the most part, Max's family had a pretty average house in a common neighborhood. The living room of the house was at the front end, and the kitchen was towards the back. The bedrooms were located upstairs. So I went to his house after school with my sleeping bag, toothbrush, and some other stuff. My mom was going to pick me up from his house the next morning. When I got there, I remember I had pizza with Max and his family and we hung out. Later on in the night, I don't remember exactly why, but for some reason we were going to sleep in the living room. Maybe it was because that's where the TV was, or maybe it was just because there was more space there. But both Max and I put our sleeping bags on the floor down in the living room. When it got late, Max's parents and sister went up to bed, and the two of us hung out in the living room. We didn't stay up that much longer though, because Max got tired pretty quickly. I remember that he got into his sleeping bag and was soon out. I, on the other hand, was not that tired. I remember laying down, getting under my covers, and closing my eyes, but for some reason, I just couldn't sleep. I really didn't feel tired at all. I didn't have a cell phone or anything way back then, so I was pretty bored. I was just laying there in the dark, looking around the living room, or trying to sleep. This went on for what felt like a really long time. I would say that it was at least 30 minutes to an hour. The house was very dark, and also completely silent. Then, suddenly, out of nowhere, I heard the sound of the garage door open. It was the door that led from the garage to the pantry, which was next to the dining room. When I heard it, I was really surprised. I had no idea who that would be. For a moment, I thought maybe it was Max's father, but I had literally seen everybody in his family go up to bed in the other direction. I also could not see the garage door from where I was. You see, the living room was completely closed off from that part of the house. You had to go around a corner and enter the kitchen. Then you would have a view of the dining room and pantry area. I could only see a small part of the kitchen from where I was, and it was the opposite direction. After I heard the door open, I briefly heard footsteps, which were really quiet, but then things were pretty much silent again. I quickly became really nervous, fearing that it might be an intruder. I was expecting whoever it was to probably walk through the kitchen and either go into the living room or go upstairs. Either way, that would be walking by me if they did. I laid in my sleeping bag and did not make a sound at all, but I did look over to the corner. I didn't see anything, but I was half expecting to see somebody walk around the corner at any moment. But as I continued to watch, I didn't see anyone. I did not hear anything more either. I definitely was not tired now. I just kept laying there, not knowing what to do or what was going on for the longest time. Maybe 10 or 15 minutes later, I still hadn't heard or seen anything, and I decided to wake Max up. I went over to him and tapped his shoulder. After a few tries, he awoke, and he asked me what was going on. I told him that I heard the garage door to the house open, and I thought that somebody had entered. He asked me if I was joking, and when I said no, he seemed to wake up. After whispering to each other and discussing it for a few moments, we decided to go and look. I was pretty nervous, but Max and I got up and walked over to the corner to go and see. We walked over, and right before we reached the wall and entrance of the kitchen, we heard the sound of the door opening again. Then, as we looked around the corner, we were just in time to see the garage door closing and somebody walking out of it. We did not get a good look at all of who the person was, but we could tell that somebody had been there. After the door to the garage shut, Max and I were both completely shocked. Max then ran over to the garage door and locked it. After that, he sprinted back over to the living room and said he was going to wake up his parents. I waited in the living room as Max went upstairs and returned about a minute later with his parents. They came down and Max's father walked into the garage. We discussed what happened with his mother, and a few minutes later, his father returned inside. He said that whoever was there had left. Max's father even looked around the backyard a little bit and was confident that he didn't see anyone. At that point, everybody pretty much went back to bed. Max's parents went back upstairs, and Max and I got back into our sleeping bags. Now, Max once again fell asleep relatively fast, and I once more could not. I laid there awake for at least another 30 minutes. Things were completely silent. However, I finally started to feel relaxed and even a little bit sleepy. But just then, those feelings were interrupted when I heard the garage doorknob turn. With it being locked though, the door did not open. I figured that the person was back. Luckily, they were not able to get inside. I just heard them try the door that one time. I kept laying there and listening. There were no more noises. Eventually, I was able to fall asleep. The next morning, I told Max about hearing the doorknob turn again the previous night. We told his parents as well, and his dad searched the entire property. However, whoever had been there must have actually been gone then, because he didn't find anything. My mom soon came and picked me up after that. I didn't really hear anything more of it from Max. I stayed over at his house a few more times, and nothing like that ever happened again.
This happened to me 2 years ago. A little context before starting the story is that at this time in my life, I had been married for almost a year with my husband Vic. Our marriage was anything but happy. At this point, he had been beating me for months now. We were both raging alcoholics, just living off our savings and living in a house that Vic's mom owned, so we didn't have to pay any rent. We just stayed home and drank all day and slept or whatever, while we were all drunk off our butts. So since there was so much violence going on in the home, I would lock him out of the house a lot of the time. He would just kick them in. We only had the front and a side door. The side door recently got the frame fixed, so it's the only one that is actually locked. The front door was all messed up, so we used an anti-break-in door stick that goes under the handle for security. Or a sense of it anyway. The story starts out on an early Sunday morning, around 11 a.m. Vic and I have been up all night from the night before, drinking and just being wild. We were sitting on the living room floor drinking beer. The TV was really loud playing music, when all of a sudden we heard someone knocking on the front door. We got scared, thinking it could be his mom looking for him or maybe the cops, because I don't really remember if we did anything crazy last night or anything. Then the knocking turns into someone trying to open the handle and push the door to try and open it. At this point, we're just like, okay, it has to be his mom. We texted her asking if it was her. She said that she was at work. Vig carefully looked through the curtains to see who it was. It was some random tall, tan and lanky middle-aged man with brown hair. The town we lived in is super small, and we were born and raised there. We know every single person in town and they know us. I immediately started freaking out, wondering who the hell that man was. I finally looked out the curtain to try and get a picture of him and to see him myself. I was so scared, but as soon as I looked out, he started walking down the porch steps. I told Vic to run and to make sure that he doesn't try to kick in the side door. The guy was nowhere in the front to be seen. I started going around all the windows on every side of the house searching for him. There's no way he got away that fast. I went towards the back of the house in the kitchen and looked out the window. I saw him walking through our backyard and across the alley. The worst part being that Vic's mom's house is across the alley. She wasn't home and she always leaves her garage door open, which leads to a sliding door to get into her home. I was totally freaking out because our son was over at her house with Vic's frail stepdad and teenage sister. We called her and we told her to tell Vic's stepdad to make sure to lock the door. She said that no one could see anyone suspicious, but that the garage was closed now. About 30 minutes passed. I couldn't relax. I was terrified. Why was that man trying to get into our house? My car was out in the driveway, so surely he must have assumed someone was home. Not to mention the loud TV you could probably hear from outside too. I told Vic I wanted to go for a drive to see if we could locate the man and call him into the police as a suspicious person. But I was just scared that he might be watching the house from somewhere, and what if he got in somehow if we left? We left Vic's phone on a FaceTime to call me in the living room to hear if any sounds were made while we were out. We drove around a couple of blocks, then we saw him. He was walking around trying people's door handles. I was terrified. I followed him down one street. He panicked once he saw that I watched him try at least 3 different houses. I was just so in shock. I was drunk and with my husband, who I'm not supposed to legally be with, and driving. I was really scared to call 911. Then the guy ran back to our street but was still a couple of blocks away from our house. I just followed behind him slowly to not lose him. We saw him go to some old man's house we know, since we walk by his house a lot. We know his adult son is usually there, but that day his truck wasn't in the driveway, just the old man's red Dodge Ram. The random man walked right into the old man's home after seeing it was unlocked and that we were still following him. My heart dropped. What if he did something to the old man? He could rob him, kill him, anything. I told Vic to go knock on the door to get the old man's attention. I parked a house away, and Vic ran up to the old man's door, immediately knocking frantically. I saw the random man and the old man come out of the house. They all stood outside on the porch talking for about 5 minutes. I saw the old man making a call, and the random man was too. I just watched nervously. After about 10 minutes, I saw the random guy just walking away from the house, allegedly still on his phone. As soon as he was a house away from where I was parked, Vic came to the car. I asked him what was going on and if the old man knew the random man. He said the old man was extremely confused as to why the random man was in his home. He had never seen him before either. Once Vic explained to him why he came to warn him of the guy entering his house, the old man was going to call the police. But the random man's excuse was that he's not from the area but was doing a job around here, and that he broke down in his company truck. So the reason he was going around trying to go into houses was because he was looking for his friend's house that he worked with, who said that his house would be open, but that he just didn't know which house it was. But of course, that just sounds extremely ridiculous and false. The old man then asked him what company he worked for so he could call them and tell them to get him. He gave some random company name. The old man started searching numbers online to call the company, and that's when the random man got on his phone and then walked away from the old man's house, allegedly calling his friend who he said could go to his house. I told Vic to go ask the old man if he would be fine now, and ask him if he wanted us to call 911 and if he would need any help with anything else. The old man thanked Vic for coming to warn him, and that he would be calling the police and making sure that they found the guy. We just decided to go back home after that. I never got back with the old man for an update, and I never heard anything else about the strange random man being arrested on the local police Facebook. The last thing I heard was that Vic's mom saw someone that matched our description of him walking on the highway out of town. I'm really glad that he wasn't able to get into our house, and I'm glad that we warned the old man about him going into his house. I was scared for weeks after this incident, and I made Vic finally fix our front door, but I was always still scared that he would come back one day, since we were the ones that saw him. Back in 2019, I was talking to a guy that I had just met through an old job. Being around him was exciting, and I loved all of the adventures we would go on. What I didn't know is that he and his best friend were selling illegal substances from his best friend's house. I never heard of this occurring, nor did they ever do this around me. Fast forward to April 6, 2019. It's around 10:30 p.m. I was 18 years old at the time, and I'm a female. I was sitting upstairs in the game room with my now ex-boyfriend when two guys with blue bandanas around their faces walked inside holding handguns. They asked,
"Yo, where's the stuff?"
In return, my ex just laughed and asked, "What stuff?" There was an empty shotgun sitting beside one of the two men, and one of them turned around and grabbed it, hitting my ex square in the face. Afterwards, they forced us to go downstairs and lay on our stomachs. I had a guy on me with a knee on my back and one right below my butt, tapping the gun to my head the entire time as they searched the home. They took my phone along with other items throughout the house. They did leave for about 5 minutes before we heard the doors being busted down again and the windows breaking. They came back for round 2. We all fell back to the ground as one of the men stepped on my ex's face where he had been hit, stating that he was lucky he hadn't been shot. They then grabbed even more items and left again. I was able to find my car keys before they came back the second time and kept them with me for the second encounter. After they left, my ex and I ran to my car as quickly as possible and then left for the hospital. By the time we had left the home, we were both covered in blood, and as when laying on the ground, my ex was bleeding horribly from the shotgun wound to his face. I'll never forget that night. The feeling of somebody else having your life in their hands selfishly, being covered in someone else's blood, and how it felt sitting alone in the hospital waiting room as I was left to soak in the thoughts of what had just occurred. This happened back in 2017. I want to start off by saying that I'm very well off in my life, and I live in a very nice house and own lots of very expensive cars and other stuff. I used to be very active on social media, including YouTube, and I posted a lot of photos and videos of things, showing them off. I never really bragged about anything. I'm not a snob, but I did show off a lot of my very expensive cars. One thing any YouTuber can tell you is that you tend to attract lots of different types of people. Trolls, Karens, stalkers, and some people that have really bad intentions. I'll admit, at the time, I wasn't too careful about some of the things that I posted, and that's likely what caused this to happen. At the time this happened, I lived in an older single-story house surrounded by woods on 2 sides. Anyway, it was late one evening around 11 p.m., and I was sitting in my living room watching TV. All of a sudden, I heard a loud bang, and I looked over to see the wooden back door by the kitchen getting kicked in and literally falling off its hinges, and then 4 masked men with guns drawn walking over to me. I was frozen with fear.
"Give us all the keys to your cars,"
one of them demanded. I didn't need to be told twice. I walked with them to the bedroom where I kept my safe and unlocked it and gave them the keys, feeling utterly defenseless at the time. After I did, I felt a sharp pain on the back of my head. The next thing I remember was waking up and then seeing blood on my carpet. I looked at the clock and it was now 4 a.m. I picked up the phone on my end table and called 911. The sheriff and ambulance took about 35 minutes to arrive because I was so far away from them. While I was in the ambulance getting treated, I had made a report with the sheriff. Strangely, only 2 of my cars had been taken, and they weren't even the most expensive ones. It really made no sense at all. The sheriff said that they might come back some other time, so they would have a deputy watch my house while I was in the hospital. I ended up spending a full day in the hospital with a concussion. One of the men had hit me in the back of the head with their gun, it seems. Later that week, I had a whole new security system installed in my house and a security gate put at the end of my driveway. After that, I was a lot more careful about what I posted online. And a couple of years later, I pretty much stopped using social media completely for many other various reasons. I've also since moved from that house. So for any social media influencers out there, just be careful of what you post online. Things travel like wildfire, and you never know who's watching. Warning: the following story mentions assault, as well as the deaths of animals. If you don't want to hear dark content like that, please skip to the next one. I'm an 18-year-old man from Scotland, and the story happened just over a year ago in June of 2023. And it isn't the scariest story out there, but it's definitely given me PTSD that will never leave me. I'll have to explain a little bit of background for this to make sense. Apologies if the story's a bit long, but there's a lot of ins and outs. So here goes. At 16, I was kicked out of my house due to an altercation with my stepdad, so I lived in a homeless unit, whom put me in a flat of my own in a rather dangerous area. My flat was filled with drug addicts and overall just really sketchy people. Anyways, after staying in the flat for a few months with my girlfriend, the police had come to our door asking for someone who we will call Frank for this story. He's still out walking the streets and could definitely still be a danger to me and my girlfriend. We told the police we didn't know who he was, and that was that. A few days later, we got a chap at our door again, and it was a man maybe about 20-ish. He told us he'd just moved in next door, and we were chatting away. I just so happened to say to him, "Oh, by the way, the police have been at my door looking for this Frank guy." And of course, he turned around and then said, "Yeah, that's me." My blood ran cold, but we just kind of laughed it off. A month or two goes by and we've spoken to him a few times. We can clearly see that he's not someone we want to be around, as he's had the police at his door. He's also had his door getting kicked in by people, and he always seemed to have really young girls in his house. We didn't know what extent this was until way after. Anyways, one day he invited us into his house since he could hear our music as we were getting drunk, and he told us he was doing the same and his ex-girlfriend was going to be coming up, so we should all go sit in his house. This is the point where we should have really listened to our gut feeling and not followed, but we were drunk, and it seemed like a good idea at the time. We went in and everything was fine. Then he told us the story about his ex-girlfriend had stabbed him and set his house on fire, killing his pets and stuff. So obviously at this point we were really uncomfortable, just thinking, oh God, who's this crazy lassie that's gonna walk in here who knows when? Then walks this tiny skinny little girl who looked like an actual child. I felt sick instantly. But that's a situation you can't exactly just up and leave, so we stayed for a bit, learning a bit more about her. It wasn't until she turned around to me and then said, "Aren't you my friend's big brother? I'm friends with her in school." And she actually said the name of my little sister. My heart sank instantly, as my little sister at the time was only 14, meaning this girl had to be around the same age, and this man was 20 if not older. We eventually asked what age she was, and she told us 15, to which he then interrupted and then said, "No, you're 16. And this is where it all started going downhill. He started seeming a bit off. He was getting more and more aggressive. At one point, he had pulled the little girl who we'll call Sophie out into the hallway, and then they were arguing, when all of a sudden we heard a couple of bangs and a thud. Then they both walked back in and Sophie was clearly shaken up. Then the next minute he had left us 3 in his flat and came back with random bits of furniture. Now, we didn't even question him on it, because he was at this point bright red with rage that was coming from nowhere, and just everything he was saying was so aggressive we didn't want to become the target of this. I forgot to mention that there was a dog in the house, and every so often Frank would turn around to us and then go, "You know, if I really wanted to, I could kill that dog." At this point, my girlfriend and I and even Sophie were just kind of looking at each other, and Sophie was on the verge of tears, pleading with him to stop going and getting this furniture, which turned out to be from the flat downstairs he had kicked the door in. He also stole the dog and then furniture and was just bringing it to his house. I can't remember what he said, but he had snapped at my girlfriend, and she then stood up and said we were leaving because she wasn't taking this anymore. Sophie turned around and started crying, pleading with us to take her with us. So of course we did, as we weren't going to leave this little girl in the house with this crazy man acting like that. Boy, was this a butterfly effect on the next year. We all got up and tried to leave, when he then followed us up his hall and was grabbing Sophie, trying to get us to leave her, saying we were stealing his bird. Bird means girlfriend for all the non-Scots out there. During all this commotion, the dog had ran out of his house and ran into ours because he was terrified. So obviously I decided to keep the dog for the night, as it wasn't even his dog. Anyway, I'll cut that part short, as there's still so much more. But at the end of that night, we had to take Sophie home on a train, and he literally followed us right to our doorstep. We had to call the police and everything, as he literally wouldn't leave us alone. Then not even a week later, my girlfriend and I are getting drunk, because what else can you do when your life is that damn stressful? That's when we started hearing banging from outside. We look through the peephole, and there's drawers and TVs and things being flung about our landing. Then we look out our window, and there's the same crap being flung out the window into the car park. This goes on for about 20 minutes, and then it just goes silent. So we kind of just forget about it and just continue getting drunk. A little while later, we hear a door banging open and shut, and then crying and shouting. So we go look through the peephole again, and it's Sophie. She's bleeding from her legs. She's red everywhere, like early bruising. Her bra is halfway out her top, and she only has one shoe on. Then this big man appears who I've seen before, and I know that he stays down below us. He looked like he was on drugs. His pupils were like saucers, and his jaw was swinging. He had no shirt on and was at least in his late 20s. He was grabbing onto Sophie and trying to get her to go back with him. So we flung the door open, and as soon as she saw us, she ran over to my girlfriend and then grabbed onto her, hugging her and sobbing. When I looked at her, she looked at me, and she was mouthing "help me" to me. This man then told us that he was Frank's friend, and that he was looking after her because she had nowhere to stay, which clearly wasn't the case. So we kind of just went back and forward with him, saying that she was going to come home with us, and that was that. That's when Sophie then ran into my house and then collapsed right in my hallway, having a panic attack, which is when he tried to come into my house. Now, I weigh about 130 pounds and I'm only like 5'3". I'm not big in any way, shape, or form, and so I'm not really intimidating in the slightest, but I stood in front of him and pushed him back out of my doorway, to which he then responded, "All right, big man, calm down." Then he left. We gave Sophie some food to eat, and she told us what happened. 3 addicts from down the stairs had took her into the house. They took her phone and called her dad, saying they were her friend's dad and that she was staying there for the night. That's when they then locked her in the house, assaulted her multiple times, and wouldn't let her leave. She then ran when she got the chance, and then ran to our landing, hoping we'd hear her. And thank God we did, because in that flat block, no one ever helps anyone. Anyways, the police came and took her to the hospital, and that was that. Or so we thought. A few days go by, and me and my girlfriend are sitting in our house. We had just ordered some Chinese food, and my gut is telling me that we can't stay in that flat anymore. I felt sick to my stomach. Every noise set us off. We were an absolute mess. So we just waited on the food coming. And while doing that, we collected all of our expensive or meaningful belongings, which was the hardest thing ever because we thought we'd never get our stuff back. We took our 2 birds, called my Nana, and she came and got us. All because we had a horrible feeling in our gut. Fast forward the next day, and I'm at work when I get a no caller ID phone call. And as soon as I see it, I just knew it was the police. I answered and hysterically started asking them if my house had been broken into, to which they then replied with, "Would you be able to make your way home right now?" confirming my theory. I then called my Nana to pick me up from work, as I didn't drive at the time. Again, I was only 17 when this happened. We got to the flat and there were police officers in my house. The whole handle and lock from inside the door was lying in my hallway. There were bin bags that had been poured all over my first room and my hallway. My TVs were all smashed, old phones were stolen. My girlfriend's jewelry box had been destroyed and things stolen from it. There were also knives and screwdrivers stabbed into the doors. One of the worst things though was a canvas of my girlfriend and 3 of her little brothers, one who sadly passed away when he was just a baby. Now, Frank knew this because we'd spoken about it that night, and only one of the babies had a load of stab holes through him. My whole house was destroyed. Everything we'd worked so hard to build together was just gone. Everything they could break, they broke. Obviously, we knew exactly who it had to be. It was Frank and his friends. Because 1, the canvas only Frank knew about, and 2, we had just saved Sophie from the other guys who ended up being arrested but let back out. So there you have it. One thing to take away from this story is always, and I mean always, trust your gut. This really worked out for us in the long run, as we now have a much nicer flat in a much nicer area near my family, and we're in so much of a better place. But sadly, we still see Frank around town, as he hangs out about within the same area as us. A constant reminder of exactly what happened and what our own stupid decisions caused. So about 12 years ago, I was 9 years old, and I was home alone with my 12-year-old brother. We were supposed to go at my aunt's house to have lunch and wait for my mother there. We always did that because we were too young to stay home alone, according to my mom. We got up at 10:30 a.m., I took a shower, and then my brother. After that, we were both in the bathroom just brushing our teeth and finishing up, when we heard someone knocking on our door. Since every time someone knocked on our door, they turned out to be a salesman or Jehovah's Witness, we kind of just waited for them to go away. After a couple of minutes, I went to see if they were still outside through the window, but no one was there. What a relief. We continued getting ready when we saw a shadow go by through the bathroom window, which was kind of like a small square made with that kind of glass that makes everything behind it really blurry. We waited and watched just in case it was a bird flying by. When a hand hit it clear as day, we got scared and we didn't know what to do. My brother had his cell phone, so he immediately called the police. While it was ringing, we had heard a loud bang at the door. Someone was brute forcing it. I don't know if they were kicking it or ramming it or what, but it was one of the most frightening things I've ever heard. My brother told me to lock the bathroom door, and so I did. It took 5 bangs until the perpetrator could finally bash open the door. Then the police answered. I remember the exact thing that my brother said. He was whispering. His voice could barely be heard.
Hello, there's someone in our house. I think they're stealing.
Then a pause.
We're at our house.
And he proceeded to give our address. Then another pause.
I'm with my little brother locked in our bathroom. Please hurry.
While all that was being said, I was sitting against the wall hugging my knees. It was one of the most nerve-wracking experiences ever. I could hear the man going through all of our stuff, emptying stands, going up and down the stairs, opening cabinets. He even broke a few cups and plates. I don't know why. I then heard the sound my cell phone makes when it turns off, and I remembered that I left it on the kitchen table. I felt so stupid for leaving it there. Things continued for a couple of minutes when we heard him trying to open the door to the bathroom. My brother got a hold of a big metal rod that we had laying around there. He started kicking the door.
Who
Who the hell's in there? The man screamed. We said nothing in return. Then he kicked again and again. I felt like I was about to have an anxiety attack. My chest started to ache, and I had chills and was really hot. I tried to remain calm, but it was just way too much. After that, he stopped. We heard the door opening, and then silence. We waited for almost 10 minutes before going out of the bathroom. The living room was a total mess. Lots of papers and books all over the floor. The cabinets were wide open, cups and plates all over the floor as well. At our mother's bedroom, the nightstand and the closet were fully open, and everything inside of them was all over the place. Upstairs in our room, it was the same thing. In just about 5 minutes, the man was able to go through everything we had and left a total mess. After that, my brother called my mom, and she ordered us to go to my aunt's house ASAP, so we did. When we got there, I was a little more relaxed. My aunt was waiting for us with ice cream, probably because my mom told her everything that happened and she wanted to calm us down a bit. We went back home at about 5 p.m. My mom told her boss that she had a home emergency, so she left work early. She tidied up the house, cleaned up, and left everything the way it was before so we could be relaxed. I really appreciated her and my aunt's efforts to calm us down and do everything they could so that we didn't have to think about it. According to my mom, the police got home after she arrived at 3 p.m., 4 hours after the incident. She explained everything that happened, but because of lack of evidence, nothing could be done. The man was never caught, and honestly, I don't think they even tried to search for him. The next few days, my mom was home with us. I now tell the story as a funny anecdote. Luckily, no one was hurt, and he only took useless stuff. But at the time, I was really scared. To a 9-year-old child, an experience like that can have serious repercussions. I'm really lucky that it never came to that, and that I got over it after a couple of weeks. I do want to mention a few more details before I end this. You may be wondering why it took 4 hours for the police to get there. My house is located on the far side of the city, but most importantly, the police in my country just suck. If you ask around, chances are plenty of people that have called the police had to wait for hours. Back then, news about how long it took for them to respond were common. In fact, one of the reasons for the 2019 Chilean protests was the dislike for the police labor. Fortunately, things are now getting better and trust for the police, while still fragile, is improving. So yeah, that's my story.